11. Chapter 11. Detention is a crime. Draco Malfoy was in hell. Far from his long-cherished revenge against the Hufflepuff beaters and their Slytherin traitor for his Quidditch humiliation, he was suffering the ultimate indignity. He was suffering a potions detention. With Gryffindors. Harry and Neville were being interrogated by Professor Snape under Professor Seinstra's watchful eye, as the two required Professor Snape's sign off on their animagus insight potion before she would allow her beloved tower to be put at risk of a Longbottomian cauldron calamity. Normally, they would have hated being interrogated by Snape in the dungeons outside of class, but Fred, George, and Draco were busy serving detention cleaning cauldrons, also under Snape's watchful eye, and more importantly, ear. Tears streamed down Malfoy's face. His soft hands chafed red and bloody from the scrubbing his soft hands had never known. But his throat, his traitorous throat, sang loud, and proud though his soul writhed in agony under the magical compulsion of the Weasleys. In days of yore, from Britain's shore Godric, the dauntless hero came and planted firm the founder's flag on Hogwarts' fair domain. Here may it wave, our boast, our pride, and joined in love together, the serpent, eagle, and badger entwined, and Gryffindor forever. Fred and George scrubbed cauldrons with every evidence of transcendent joy as they belted out the chorus of Gryffindor forever, and Malfoy, his Slytherin soul aflame, was forced to follow along. Hermione and Milisent were theoretically paying close attention to the animagus insight potion discussion for their own post-Yule attempts at the same brew, but Noodle was cheerfully curled up on Snape's desk, swaying his long neck as if conducting the concert. Malfoy was finally able to muster enough will to break the weak Gryffindor compulsion and stop singing, only to see Professor Snape flash out his wand and land a stinging hex on his pure-blooded godsons over pampered posterior. "Scrub, Mr. Malfoy, and sing." Snape hissed. "That is oppression. I am being oppressed," cried Draco Malfoy, son of Lucius Malfoy and the House Malfoy, or bad faith in the mother tongue, was not one that usually experienced oppression, consequence, or justice. Professor Seinstra, her onyx skin shining in the light, looked upon the blonde noble scion and smiled cruelly. You will find song is often the only solace or escape for the oppressed. You will cover that in your Muggle studies owl year, if you chose that elective. The former Slytherin professor smiled, less than fond memories of being in House Slytherin when Lucius Malfoy was prefect. Harry and Neville had to admit that Snape was indeed being extremely hard on them, but considering his lengthy explanations about the physical and magical consequences that came from the dozens of possible errors in this particularly dangerous potion, it was hard to see Snape's actions as being anything but professional, even though he clearly loathed having to permit the risk at all. Worse, he never used the close proximity to attempt any legilimency to probe Harry's thoughts, nor to implant suggestions about the third floor. Snape's actions failed to settle the question of whether the former Death Eater was Voldemort's current agent in any positive way. Death-eating Crow hates every student. He only hates yellow-haired prey, and Water Witch slightly less. Yellow-haired prey because he feels he's some sort of nest mate, and Water Witch because she is gifted with potions. Noodle hissed, dancing to the tune of suffering Slytherins and singing Gryffindors. Dollar Root Singer is good at potions too, piously defended Milisent, noting Neville had become almost as good a potioner as once he mastered his own Jira rune-linked gifts. Noodle laughs, pressing into her hands for more petting. Death-eating Crow treats his cauldrons like a brood mother treats her eggs. Root Singer and Speaker are egg breakers. He would forgive them killing yellow-haired prey before he would forgive a cauldron breaker. Noodle laughed in Parsleytongue, making Draco shiver as he sang. The day before Yule, Scotland decided that it being Yule mattered more than being solidly in the ocean biome, and decided that snow, not sleet, was the order of the day. And given that most of the students and staff had gone home for the holidays, those children that remained determined that snowball fights and irresponsible use of magic were indeed the order of the day. One could not blame the Weasley twins, for the actual war began when Adrian Pusey caught fellow Prefect Perfect Percy Weasley crossing the main courtyard, and animated the rather improbably boobed Snow Witch he had been making. pinning the screaming Percy between the huge snow cones of the animated snow golem in a sprightly dance about the main courtyard. Penelope Clearwater, Ravenclaw prefect, who for the record was not Percy's girlfriend, whatever anyone who has seen them sneaking out of various broom cupboards on the fourth floor may have whispered, responded by animating several eagles out of snow who flew after and attacked the Slytherin prefect. Seeing Gryffindor and Ravenclaw arrayed against Slytherin, Harry's Hufflepuff soul cried out to even the match, and if one Hufflepuff first year was not the equal of dueling fifth-year prefects, then he could drag his Slytherin cohort in to even the odds. To arms Bulstrode, Slytherin is assailed. Harry cheered happily, grabbing Milisent and dragging her out the door and into the fray. Don't start what you can't finish. It is literally engraved on the Slytherin common room wall, right beside. Open battle is the sign of failed strategy, Milisent said. Her beta instincts to get stuck in warring with her Slytherin nature that looked on frontal assaults and meeting engagements the same way they looked at luxury taxes and baggage inspections. Percy Weasley settled the issue by raising his wand and screaming, "Reducto!" and blasting the sloping roof, freeing several 100 pounds of snow and ice to attempt to bury her and Harry. A panicked and reflexive use of her ice magic to transform the dangerous incoming load into a dome of ice covering Harry and Milisent. Harry looked at Milisent, wand and eyebrow raised. Milisent tied back her hair and rolled up her sleeves. "Oh, it is bloody on now," she insisted, waving her wand and muttering as the ice dome became an ice castle complete with battlements and arrow slits to sight through and target enemy prefects. Milisent would form the snowballs and hoist them into mid-air. She used her ice magic to hold them together as Harry maintained a cyclone overhead that both defended them against diving snow eagles and accelerated the formed snowballs rather like the ball thrower in a batting cage. The resultant snowballs were doing better than 90 kilometers an hour when they screamed downrange. Penelope shrieked as her shield only stopped the first dozen, as Harry used a little wind magic to begin throwing curved balls that went over and around her shield to pelt her repeatedly. Percy swiftly built his own castle of snow and began making snow lions to charge the ramparts of the Slytherin castle, while Penelope began chanting and scribing runes in the walls of the castle. Soon ballistae of ice were shooting back snowballs hard enough to blast chunks out of the Slytherin ramparts. Fred and George chose to wade in on their brother's side, as Pusey, Bulstrode, and Potter were all valid Quidditch rivals, while Percy was Percy and thus eligible to be left to swing. He was defending his Lady Fair, who was both not Percy and not a Quidditch rival, and thus rated a twin defense. They began to animate Snow Bludger and Snitches to send howling at the enemy ramparts, also sometimes Percy, which they would later claim was utterly accidental, but mostly at the enemy. Adrian Pusey, who had crawled into Fort Noodle, as the proud snake on the outer ramparts proclaimed, was more the worse for wear after being mauled by two of the snow lions as he made the last dash for safety. "Vengeance is a dish best served cold," Pusey quoted, spending a few minutes making what looked like a perfectly ordinary snowball. That is also on the Slytherin wall, along with guilt is assigned by the one who got caught the least to the one who understood the least. Milisent cheered happily, raising an animated snow fist, holding an ice beater bat to swat a charging snow lion into the path of a diving ice eagle. "Give us a hand, Potter. This one has to reach Percy," Adrian Pusey said, after carving several interesting runes into the snowball, then covering them with a layer of fresh powder. Rubbing the back of his head, where either Fred or George had caught him with a real snowball hidden inside the illusion of a slightly larger snowball he had spotted, then ignored, Harry complied happily. The rather large snowball shot like a cannon behind 4 normal snowballs which Percy blasted with casual wand flicks. Adrian Pusey got up, pointed his wand at the last snowball, and shouted, "Hentai Animus." Percy screamed in horror as the final snowball transformed into a snow octopus, dodged around Percy's counterspell, and engulfed the surprised prefect Percy with animated tentacles that found their way under the prefect's clothes, apparently everywhere to judge by his screams. An irritated Professor Quirrel stalked through the courtyard, lashing his wand outright, and left silently, blasting all fortifications and constructs from existence. The wind stilled, the snow settled, and a blast of fear silenced the laughing teens. For a second, perhaps two, no one dared move. Of course, fear and good sense are two things that do not know the password to the Gryffindor Tower, so before Professor Quirrell had made it to the door at the opposite side of the courtyard, Fred and George had reformed and reanimated a dozen snowballs that tracked directly into the back of Professor Quirrell's purple turban. The impacts drove an odd cry of "Master" from Quirrell, but after the last snowball hit the back of the turban, the burst of laughter from the teens stopped in mute horror. Fred and George were gripped by invisible hands around the neck and hurled against the far wall as their limbs spread outward and began to pull, as if about to rip right out of the Gryffindor teens' sockets. "Professor!" shouted Harry in protest, raising his own wand against Professor Quirrell. Although Quirrell stood with his back to them, his hands clutching his head, and wand pointed the wrong way, Harry felt a powerful lance of legerdemacy pierce his outer defenses like a goblin battle-axe through a wizard's shield. For a second, Harry had a flash of red hair, green eyes, and a smiling, beautiful face, then a long, black, whip-like body, surmounted by eyes so black they drank the night, and white fangs that promised the end of all things flashed, and whatever had driven into Harry's mind screamed in agony. Seconds later, a scream that sounded far deeper than Quirrell's sounded, and Fred and George fell from the wall, neither dead nor dismembered. Quirrell scuttled through the door and was gone before anyone could really react. Harry heard the hissing of Noodle in his mind, not in his ears, and his head ached like he had just taken a bludger to the forehead. What the heck was that about? Percy and Penelope were helping Fred and George up, checking them for serious injuries. "Seems to really like bandage our Quirrell," offered Fred, cries out "Master" when spanked. "Noted George, think he likes movies about gladiators. Asked Fred, knows more about wand care than is strictly speaking required for self-care. Mused George, rides more broom than the average Quidditch player." Agreed Fred. Percy was fuming. "Enough with the wand jokes. You could have been seriously hurt. I am going to report this to McGonagall or the headmaster," he said, voice shaking as he looked at the marks showing how close his twin brothers had come to serious harm. "You can't report to McGonagall," Penelope said softly. "She, Professor Flitwick, and Professor Babbage are down in the second dungeon level doing the annual ward renewal. It happens every Yule and takes the whole night." Pusey looked concerned, still watching the door Professor Quirrell had just gone through. "Can't report to Dumbledore until later either." He got some urgent letter from the ministry and had to go to London by broom rather than flu or apparition for some bloody reason for secrecy. Professor Snape was more than a bit upset to be left as the on-call professor for the next few days. Pusey said softly. He turned to his fellow prefects and said softly, "Anyone notice the silent casting, the wandless magic, and Merlin's own power that poor stuttering Quirrell just pulled off?" Adrian Pusey asked softly. Penelope Clearwater, a Ravenclaw to the core, had spotted the second anomaly. "He wasn't facing us. No eye contact. Without a wand, you need to shape and guide your intent visually. He had the back of his turban facing us. Unless he has eyes in the back of his head, that is just not possible," Penelope argued. Adrian nodded. "Yeah, well, a few impossible there altogether. I know we have the whole duty to report thing, but how about this once we be just a little Slytherin about it, and wait until the fellow who beat Grindelwald, the retired undefeated European dueling champion, and the greatest mistress of transfiguration since the headmaster, aren't all out of range at the same time?" You could see Percy realizing that he might not be safe if even if he reported to another teacher hit Percy like a ton of bricks, not snow. His faith in authority failed in the face of the growing strangulation marks on his brothers' necks. He nodded silently, agreeing to wait until Dumbledore, McGonagall, and Flitwick were available before attempting to get Quirrell in trouble. Milisent and Harry didn't talk until they tracked down Hermione, Noodle, and Neville in the greenhouse with Professor Sprout harvesting seed pods. "We found Voldemort. It's Quirrell," said Harry simply. Hermione smiled and said, "We can go tell." That is as far as she got before Harry cut in. Dumbledore, Flitwick, McGonagall, and every professor who can threaten a pixie is conveniently out of contact except the known Death Eater Snape. "Oh, bugger," Hermione said, visibly deflating. "What are we going to do now?" Harry said, the urge to fight rising in his goblin soul, but every voice of reason argues that it would only get them killed. Yule, said Neville. What? Said Harry, surprised at the non sequitur. Look, I know I am the only pureblood raised pureblood in the group. I know that we aren't supposed to really do this kind of magic anymore, but the whole point of Yule is kind of necromancy. You stand in the heart of the dark, in the longest night of the year, you gather the people you care about, and you make merry in the middle of night when death is closest, calling your dead to join with you and find a way to make it through until brighter days. Neville said. I hardly think throwing a party in the middle of the woods and doing dark magic is going to help us deal with the fact that Voldemort's bloody agent is in the castle, already working through the defenses that keep the Philosopher's Stone away from resurrecting Voldemort right in the middle of the castle. Harry raged, his anger and fear making him lash out. Milisent Bulstrode grabbed his arm. Although half-blood, she had been raised by pureblood mother and inducted into the mysteries as a child. She knew what Neville was suggesting. No, Harry, Neville is suggesting we go to Yule to ask the person who killed Voldemort the first time. This is Yule. We wassail hard in the heart of the dark. We invite those who have gone before to join us in the night farthest from the light and closest to the grave. Millicent said softly. Mum, Harry whispered. 12, Chapter 12, Mirror, Mirror. Professor Sprout was so proud of her little Hufflepuffs. 3 of the elemental guardians were of her own house. A full quartet of elementals, a full circle for the first time in half a century. While elementals were rare, elementals that shared affinity enough to balance with others in ritual practice were far rarer. To find 4 that balanced each other without years of practice and guidance was almost unheard of. It was as if magic itself had brought them together to balance something that was out of balance. Professor Seinstra had paced out the inner circle, her wand opening the earth with a whisper and word, creating a boundary between the magic of the forbidden forest and the ritual. She defined the space the quarters would contain. Mad-Eye Moody paced her 2 paces outside, the warder and drummer of the rite. His longer footfalls stomping heavily, the wood of his artificial leg being so worked with protective magics as to be a focus nearly as powerful as the forbidden battle staff that hammered home with the opposite steps. His warding was aided by his whirling artificial eye, as his muttered chant and the blazing runes of his staff tuned the wards to allow the passage of spirits without ill intent and bar those of evil wishing. There were a dozen witches and half a dozen wizards gathered in the shade of the Forest Lord, a tree so ancient it loomed over the founders when the first stone of Hogwarts was raised. No power would move in the heart of the forest, save by its will. Here even the eyes of Dumbledore were blind, and the creatures of Voldemort could see only if they dared the heart of the forest to see with their own eyes. Moody grinned. These forests had accepted such sacrifices before, and Yule was a time for such offerings. He would not mind to hang Death Eater corpses from the ancient tree in return for the promise of a bright new year. He retired from the ministry when they became more interested in protecting Death Eaters than hunting them. He had not forgotten. His war was not over. Looking inward at the children Professor Sprout and Poppy Pomfrey were so excited about. Moody was a Hufflepuff before he was an Auror, and loyalty was written so deep in his bones the scars on body and soul could not scour it free. Yet to put faith in 4 children, and one a Slytherin, smacked of Dumbledore-level foolishness. He put no faith in prophecy, not trust in fate. There was no hope of redemption for the Death Eaters, no seed of good in Voldemort. They lived for cruelty and death. They were not sick, they were the disease. They needed to be purged, not saved. Children could not do it, but neither Dumbledore nor the Ministry even pretended to try. Neville Longbottom, a boy Moody remembered as being afraid of his own shadow, threw off his bearskin cloak's hood and turned to the north. He should have sounded foolish, a child of 12 calling on the power of the dark earth, the protectors of the dead. At this, the darkest part of the year, it was the time of reaping, of death, not of planting, growth, and plenty. What did a beardless boy know of loss, of pain, of prices paid? His voice rang slow and surprisingly deep. Hail to the guardians of the watchtowers of the north. I do summon, stir, and invoke thee. Let those spirits living and dead that hear us, and bear us no ill will, be welcome in our circle, welcome in our feast, welcome in our rite. Let those powers that bear us ill will be cast from this circle. Let the forest gnaw their bones, and the thirsty earth receive their blood, so mote it be. A power pulsed beneath the ground, washing out as far as Professor Seinstra's carved boundary, before washing back. Where it touched, dark roots of and serrated leaves crawled from the ground. Holly, the sacred plant of Yule, the mark of the Yule Father's favor on it, as blood-red berries hung from cruel-edged leaves and thorned branches binding the circle. The power of the Earth Mother beat beneath the soil, a slow, terrible thing that men and women worshipped at a time before words and wands. When Muggle and Magical stood united in wonder at the power of Earth and Sun, Hermione threw off her robe entirely, standing only in her school robes, with Noodle's length coiled from her right arm to her left arm, and about her shoulders, that his head hung past her left as her wand did her right. Hail to the guardians to the watchtowers of the south. I do summon, stir, and invoke thee. Here in the heart of the dark, I light the hearth fire, that all who come to us may find warmth and welcome. I light the beacon in the heart of the dark, when the memory of the sun is lost, that all may raise their voice in joy, that it may hear and return to us. Her voice was proud, and fire wreathed her like a cloak, wreathing the serpent in turn, then down to the earth where it raced along the holly, wreathing the ring of thorns in flames that coated each leaf and branch, each berry and root, but burned them not. Moody's eye flared, but there was no illusion, no spell. Magic, the wild magic of the forest, twisted and twined about them. The ley lines the castle was built to tap ran in the earth beneath them in quiet rivers, rivers that were beginning to stir and answer. This was not power to be shaped by spell, nor did they stand beneath ward stones crafted over months by rune masters working with the finest arithmancy calculations and the auspices of a gifted astronomer. This was ancient, prehuman power called by ignorant children. He was a warder, part of the outer circle. He drummed to keep those who danced in the power together, that they could weave their intent into what they called up, but this ritual was beyond him already. Milisent tossed back her hood, black leather trimmed with white fur. Her face was strong and cold, her voice seemed to belong to the days before, to the time of scattered tribes hunting upon the ancient ice, offering blood to the night and stars for the promise of a successful hunt. Hail to the guardians of the watchtowers of the west. I do summon, stir, and invoke you. Born from the mother of waters, and reaching he final river, of Slidia that runs through the land of the dead, whose bed is the weapons of all man's wars, and whose shores the living know not, I call forth the river that runs in the land of the final silence, the ice that is the end of all things. Moody Rapt called up his power, letting it fill him, and beat against his will for release, as he did in battle, for the darkness roared from the trees in a wave to lap against the flame. And where it touched the scarlet flames wrapping the holly, the flames burned cold and blue. The light called corpse fire, the light that danced on the tombs of the unquiet dead. The magic that roared in the circle was black enough to stop Dumbledore's heart and cause the Minister of Magic to need a change of underwear. It was not evil, nor was it good. It was ancient and terrible, and cared little for the morality of man. Harry Potter turned, and Moody saw the corpse fire, turned his glasses into unreadable mirrors, and clung to the curse-scarred rune in his head with sympathetic cold fire. His voice was sad, heavy, and shook with emotion. Hail to the guardians of the watchtowers of the east. I do summon, stir, and invoke thee. I call upon the wind, the first breath of life, the last breath of passing. I call upon the air that receives our will and our wish, our breath and our prayer. I call upon the inspiration that fills us, the memories that shape us, and the whispers that remember us. I stand in the heart of the dark and I call. Let all those who call to us, who are bound to us, who would share with us, if you be of good intent, living or dead, by the powers of earth and flame, ice and breath, come as thou will. Harry's power released that which had gathered, and a heavy fog rolled in and beat at the edge of the circle. This was no earthly fog, for it was the Ginnungagap, the primordial mists of the void. Moody had seen this bound in the veil in the Department of Mysteries. This mist was not of this world, though the world was born from it. It was not bound in time or space, and knew rules of its own that ran in directions magic of this world did not. Moody's heart nearly stopped. From the mist, shapes began to walk. He was a Hufflepuff, for all that he was the caricature of a rabid wolverine that was a protective shell for one who cared too deeply and lost too many. From the mists walked friends he had lost in the war, people he had tried and failed to save, and more than a few comrades who made it through the war, but could not live with the peace that gave all what they fought for away. This was true necromancy, as Voldemort sought to practice. This was not the creation of undead, nor the binding of spirits. This was the old magic, the forbidden magic from the time before the Muggles' church made magic a thing of fear and evil, from a time when the tribes remembered, honored, and welcomed their dead. His good eye wept. This magic was forbidden, so forbidden it was worth a Dementor's kiss to practice, but he had no regrets. She was here. They both were. The wife and daughter he lost to Voldemort when he dared to think he could leave war behind and have a home and life. That there could be a time for Alistair Moody the man, not the weapon. For whatever happened, he would forgive Potter and his friends. His wife and daughter were back, just for a moment. Harry shook with emotions he could not describe. His father was there, a shade in black and white, looking a lot like him, but grown to fine, strong man. Untamed hair, and a casual confidence that was saved from arrogance only by the restful awareness of an apex predator, a warrior too secure in his own power to play petty dominance games. Harry began to understand why his father had the reputation he had at such a young age, yet that is not what stopped his heart. His mother strode farther forward, and she was not rendered in shades of black and white from the fog of the Ginnungagap. Her hair was red like Hermione's fire, her eyes the bright green of the killing curse, and her face, while beautiful, had a focus and clarity that spoke of ruthlessness that dripped blood at every edge and did not care. Harry looked upon the face of his mother and felt love wash over him, but also the soft whisper of fear. "Mom, you aren't dead," Harry said, the whisper of inspiration filling him. She had the color that the spirits of the dead did not. "Not while he lives." Lilly Potter said, then turned to share a sad, soft smile with her long-lost husband. "I gave up eternity so that Voldemort could not steal your life and use it for something foul," Lily said. Harry reached out to touch her, and his skin burned where he touched her. The ghost of burning and the memory of screaming filled his head. Lily smiled, and in it was a flash of cruelty he hoped never to see again. "What do I need to do to bring you back?" Harry begged, the power of the ritual beating within him, his friends holding and balancing the power, while the adult witches and wizards plied centuries of combined experience to weave the power into something that could be endured if not controlled. Lily smiled. "There is no coming back. I was not strong enough to stop Voldemort from killing me, but I sacrificed my soul to protect you from him. He put a fragment of his soul into you. He brought an object of power to contain it. A Horcrux, a spirit vessel designed to keep a fraction of his soul to save him even from death. My ritual to protect you allowed me to use my soul to wrap his and bind it in you. I gave all my magic, all the soul that survived the killing of my body to bind it to your blood and your power. I grave runes upon you so that you could eat that bit of his power, and bound myself to your blood until it was done." Lily threw back her head and laughed, and her laughter was the laughter that made muggles hide inside behind doors bound in cold iron and whisper quiet prayers that the witches passed them by. "Then the goblins found you, and bound my runes in goblin silver, binding my power and Voldemort's to you. You ate his Harry. With my magic and their runes, your soul and your power ate that little bit of Voldemort that he needed to be immortal. I only sought to protect you from him, but with the goblin runes of power binding my magic to your soul, they have made me into the weapon you need to devour Voldemort's soul." Lily had tears in her eyes, a suffering he could not guess buried behind a mother's resolve to do anything for her child. Harry shuddered as she spoke. "I'm not strong enough, Mom. I think I found his agent, and I know what he is after, but he crushed 2 wizards stronger than me without even speaking a word or touching a wand." "Can't beat him." Harry wept. He was a goblin warrior. No goblin could walk upon the same earth as the killer of his father or mother, and Voldemort killed both. Yet against Voldemort he was helpless. Dumbledore could not kill him when they fought, and Harry would not dare lift a wand against the headmaster. Lily laughed again, this time slow and soft. "Oh, Harry, I could not face Voldemort either, but together we can end him," she said softly. "I don't understand," Harry said, anger rising. "Dumbledore has moved you like his little chess piece, so determined to sacrifice you for the greater good as he did James, and I, all in the name of stopping Voldemort. Voldemort is happy to play, because he plans on sacrificing you to pay the price for his immortality, but they are both fools." Lily turned to look at Neville, who struggled and sweated to hold the power of the earth and underworld in balance as the dead trod the land of the living on the night the veil was thinnest. She bowed, and with her wand carved the rune Jira in the air. It burned with green fire that matched their eyes, that matched the flash of Voldemort's killing curse on the last night he saw her alive. Sacrifice means to make sacred that which is offered. I am not half the witch that Voldemort or Dumbledore is, but I am a witch, and I remember the power of sacrifice. They both seek to sacrifice others to win their war, but they have forgotten the truth of magic. Lily turned and faced her son. Remember this, sacrifice has power proportional to its cost to you. Voldemort has split his soul so much his is more shadow than man. Each sacrifice holds less and less power, for no price paid by anyone else is real to him. Dumbledore let half the world burn before he could be bothered to raise a wand to Grindelwald, letting others pay the price to put an end to what he created, and in the end would not dirty his soul or hands with blood to stop him. He has sacrificed more to his greater good than even he remembers, but not himself. I imagine he barely feels it anymore. Harry looked upon his mother in growing horror. "Mom, what does that mean? What about you?" Harry demanded, suspecting the truth already. "Voldemort sought to sacrifice you to live forever. Dumbledore wants to sacrifice you to save the world. I sacrificed myself to stop Voldemort. As long as I am bound to you, your touch and your power will consume him. When he is gone, I will be no more," Lily said softly. The ghost of James moved to face her, and they shared a look. Harry's eyes grew wet with tears. He was willing to let her go. At least she would be with his father again. "At least you will be with Dad, and I can see you again when I pass," Harry said, his resolve firming. James' ghost cast its eyes down, and Lily flinched as if hit. "The reason you can defeat Voldemort is the power of my sacrifice. I didn't offer my life. More would have taken that anyway. Magic would not honor something that would be lost anyway. I sacrificed eternity. When Voldemort dies, his soul and mine will be no more." Lily faced her son, and two sets of green eyes burned into each other, neither willing to give. "You will die," Harry raged. "You will live," Lily stated. "Go to him. Deny him what he wants. Let him dare to touch what is mine to protect." Lily snarled, an unseen wind whipping her hair like a crown of fire and blood. The title of Boy Who Lived took a new and bitter tang upon his tongue. Grave dirt and blood mixed, and he threw up violently all that he had eaten in the feast. Lily looked on sadly, and James nodded in mute understanding. Looking over at Hermione, Milisent, and Neville, who were straining to contain the power of the ritual, he raised voice, power, and wand. "The circle is open, but unbroken. Stay if you will, go if you must." Harry spoke, and the mist of the underworld swept from the circle as if driven by a powerful wind. The trees bent and moaned in the wind, but those in the circle were untouched. Moody looked upon the weeping boy kneeling in the circle before a puddle of puke. He grinned. He watched as the Longbottom boy, a Slytherin half-blood, and a Muggle born with a ruddy great magical snake wrapped around her descended on the boy who lived and gathered him into their protective embrace. Dumbledore had no idea what he was fostering in Hogwarts. He thought to truss a lamb for slaughter, sought to play his ruddy games of sacrifice and redemption. Moody had been one of the few who fought in Albus Bloody Dumbledore's precious Order of the Phoenix. Most only gathered and plotted and kept count of the dying. They raced from battle to battle, defending and capturing, while their enemies killed. The Prewitt brothers, James and Lilly Potter, his own wife and child, Frank and Alice Longbottom, not dead, but better dead. Peter Pettigrew dead, and Sirius defected, not the way Moody would have bet. And all the while, those they caught and caged mostly escaped to fight again, or bought their way out of prison. His friends and loved ones remained dead, but their enemies got Dumbledore's precious second chance. He looked at those 4, 12 years old, marked by magics as dark and forbidden as anything Voldemort or his Death Eaters used, yet clean and human. These 4 were wild and untamed, not dark or light. They fought for each other and for whoever they cared enough to defend. They sang no hymns to the light. Their eyes and souls were scarred with loss already. They would fight for their own, and the grave could hold who stood against them. Moody grinned. He turned to Poppy and Sprout. "Keep these ones from doing something noble or stupid until they grow some fur and fangs. I don't think Dumbledore will find them easy to control as we all were the last time. Who knows? Buy them enough time. They might even win. Fresh from the chance to talk to those he had lost so long ago, and buoyed by the promise this next war would not be fought with stunners and group hugs, he stumped off into the night, singing softly. The four friends were lost deep in thought as they snuck back into Hogwarts. They were not that observant as they dealt with processing the ritual that connected them both with the touch of magic as a living entity extending far beyond the understanding and laws of witches and wizards, and with their own dead come back for a shared Yuletide. Noodle, on the other hand, was on the job. Nasty, sneaksy, snitchy cat. Snitches get stitches, hissed Noodle as he pounced on and pinned Flitch's cat, Mrs. Norris. Don't kill her, Noodle, Harry hissed in alarm. Don't kill Stinky Dead Turban. Don't kill yellow-haired prey. Don't kill death-eating crow. Don't kill angry squib child beater. Don't kill snitchy cat. Honestly, how is one snake supposed to keep you alive if you keep stopping me from killing your enemies? Noodle hissed angrily. Hermione frowned and looked at Milisent. Is it wrong that I am starting to think Noodle has a point? Neville groaned. I am the only one with a shovel. I am not burying all of them. Besides, my gran says that you should never murder anyone any place you don't either own or never have to return to. Millicent shrugged. Pure blood have etiquette rules about everything. You just sort of pick them up growing up. Hermione complained. Someone should write them down. It isn't fair if only muggle-borns and muggle-raised don't know the unwritten rules about murder when there are so many people trying to murder us. In Parseltongue, don't write your rules in monkey speak. If I wait for Speaker to share what is important, you will all be years dead before he gets to the important bit. Get Mouse Giver the book of allowable murder. Choking out cats is tiring, and I am not dragging away anything I don't get to eat. Noodle hissed, having successfully choked out Mrs. Norris. The unconscious cat was still breathing as Noodle released her. They decided to take the secret passage off the main stairs down by the kitchen to get to the dungeon where both Slytherin and Hufflepuff common rooms were found. If Flitch was actively hunting them, they couldn't chance the main stairs. Can I eat this one? Noodle asked, crawling over the frozen and terrified face of Professor Snape. He poked the professor with his head and tested his cheek for temperature and firmness. Not dead, fresh and helpless. It is almost like an offering mouse, only without the health potions for good skin that Mouse Giver adds. Noodle asked, having tested Professor Snape and found him to be both quite alive and unable to resist. Millicent was the first to put it into words. This is bad. Professor Snape was the only one with power to even slow Quirrel down that was left in the castle. Sprout and Seinstra went off with Moody to do a private feast. McGonagall, Flitwick, and Babbage are down at the Keystone working on the wards, and Dumbledore is off on a bloody broom to London, probably stopping to play Father Christmas for some light family propaganda on the way. Harry felt his blood go cold. We have to stop Quirrel and get past Dumbledore's defenses to do it. He turned around to go upstairs when Millicent grabbed him by the collar. Oh, you sweet summer Hufflepuff, we all know you are brave, but let's not be Gryffindor about this. If we are going to walk into a trap, let us at least get prepared. Millicent said, quoting her only favorite Gryffindors. Hermione chimed in. She is right. We know which professors made defenses. We know we need music to get past Fluffy. We know there are plants under that. We know Quirrell gave some sort of dark creature. McGonagall did some transfiguration, Flitwick some sort of charm, and Snape would have found a way to do potions and dark magic enough to remind Dumbledore that the post should have been his. Neville smirked. You know, Millicent and I had been brewing potions for your Yule presents. Hermione grinned. Harry and I had been making a potions belt with the space expansion sacks from Te Acromantula. Harry thought for a second. Brooms and bats, he asked, as any sort of beater tended to feel more safe with a broom under him and a nice solid bat in hand. Neville and Millicent offered thumbs up. Noodle and Hermione exchanged a weary sigh. It was a well-equipped and woefully underexperienced quartet and Snake that approached the terribly forbidden and all but labeled door, death or glory, enter at own risk. Hermione pointed her wand Alohomora she cast softly, and the door opened. Hermione frowned. It's more than a little insulting. I mean, a first-level unlocking spell, one that could defeat a basic muggle lark and the most basic sealing charm, but would not have a chance against the second or third tier locking charm that a fourth of fifth year would be expected to know. It is almost advertising that this is a trap for first years. It is like they aren't even really trying to hide it. Hermione ranted quietly. Harry grinned. Remember, I was supposed to be Gryffindor. Brave and bold, charging in to sacrifice myself for revenge and the greater good. I was raised goblin. We don't do greater good. We pray our vaults overflow with gold, and our blades drip with the blood of our enemies. We very much live to go home, count the gold, and take great pleasure in cleaning off other people's blood. $C. This is why I keep him around. Noodle cheered, at last happy his designated human was showing signs of survival instinct at last. Neville grinned. That, and you are Hufflepuff enough to bring friends. You don't have to be Voldemort's equal, you just have to have friends enough to cover the obstacles to get you there, and just one trick more than he was expecting when he catches you. Milisent sighed. First rule, don't get caught. Second rule, don't let anyone survive catching you. Third rule, deny ever employing rule 1 or 2. It is like Hufflepuffs don't have any sayings on their common room at all. Don't badgers get taught anything vaguely survival-related. What a witch is wise. This is why none of you can be allowed out without reptile supervision. Honestly, so far she is the only one showing half enough sense to be trusted with mouse speaker. Hermione squeaked, and 3 other humans shouted in protest, just in time to wake a large 3-headed dog the size of a Muggle tractor-trailer, or elephant if those came in 3-headed carnivore. Harry pulled out his panpipes and began to play a lullaby he remembered Frithweaver singing to him when he was a child under Gringotts. The Cerebos who had roused from the ground and ready to charge, Instein ambled casually over to give them all a sniff, and then settled in on his paws to listen. Harry continued to breathe into his panpipes, pouring his memory of the lullaby into his breath. Magic infused his breath, and he bound the memory of being sung to sleep into the pipes. The charm would not hold forever. He would be lucky if it held until dawn. But as he let go the pipes, they hung in mid-air and continued to play. Neville and Milisent both had to heave on the heavy iron ring on the trapdoor. They supposed a grown wizard would just levitate it, but their only levitation charm worked best on organic matter that was not alive, robes, feathers, clubs, and brooms, and not so much stone trapdoors. Beneath was a wall of writhing dark thorns that hissed and slithered across each other like an orgy of plant chainsaws. "Wahoo!" shouted Neville as he jumped happily into the plant-based food processor, the mass of flesh-shredding tendrils causing him not a single neuron's worth of fear or caution. As the 3 humans with good sense opened their mouth to scream at Neville's pending gruesome death, they saw him bouncing happily as the devil's snare acted like a frisky living bouncy castle for the Longbottom heir. I love this stuff. There is a forbidden greenhouse on the grounds of Longbottom Manor. When I was a kid, my Uncle Algy brought me to see, then accidentally locked me in. I was terrified because the sign out front had a big skull and said, "Danger," and I started to cry. The next thing you know, tentacles of thorn came and grabbed me. They took me into the main roots and made a nest for me. They caught me a rabbit to eat, which was kind of gross uncooked, but I was hungry, and they cut it up for me so nicely. I was napping in there for hours before Gran came all panicked and found me. Neville said, without any irony at all. Milisent began swearing, using some words that would get her mouth scougified even in Slytherin, while Hermione shook her head and told Neville not unkindly, "Neville, we really are not letting you go home alone until your Uncle Algy is dealt with," she said, and this time Harry and Milisent nodded emphatically to agree. Neville looked concerned, but gestured, and tendrils of green reached up and grabbed the other 3 teens, slowly lowering them through the saw-toothed deadly plants as if they were a nanny transporting a baby for its bath, not a man eating defensive plant. Walking down the tunnel, they smelled a smell that Neville found more familiar than the rest, the essence of troll being his personal curse as he sweat out his suppressor toad poisoning. The 4 slowed as the tunnel started to open into a rather large and high-ceilinged room. "Well," said Harry, 3 guesses what Professor Quirrel supplied for a monster. "And the first 2 don't count," cheered Milisent. "I don't see why you are so happy," said Hermione, some rather unfond memories of her last troll blossoming in her head. "I never got to do the troll the last time, because someone went to the bathroom alone, breaking the very sensible first rule of Slytherin girls," said Milisent piously. "For a house that produces lawyers, politicians, dark lords, and crime lords, you have a lot of rules," complained Hermione, eyeing the irritated troll that was rubbing its eyes as if clearing off the effects of a stunner powerful enough to break through even troll defenses. Harry pulled out his club. "We have clubs this time. I will bite you. We are bound, so you probably won't die. If you say something that's stupid again, I am going to test this," Noodle hissed. "Harry," Hermione said slowly, "I know Dumbledore has been trying to program you to be his little sacrifice since you were born, but try to do a little critical thinking. The troll has a club that weighs more than all of us combined. You can't block it, and I don't like your chances for getting past it without someone getting hurt. This isn't a girl's bathroom. He has room here." Neville grabbed at his belt and pulled out a handful of berries. He grinned softly. "That's right, Hermione. He has a club. Great big tree trunk. This is Yule still, and the circle isn't broken yet." Neville held up the holly berries to Harry. "What do you say, Harry? Could you get those berries to the club?" Neville said, a smile that belonged on either a killer whale with a fresh-sunk yacht or a Weasley when a long-planned prank was about to erupt, looking oddly at home on Neville's face. Harry pointed to the berries in Neville's outstretched hand and chanted, "Ventus," as he cast his wand through the movement of the gust of wind spell. The berries flew in a twister of summoned wind to spatter along the troll's club. The great beast turned in alarm, looking for enemies it could not see, as his true enemies hid in the tunnel that was too small for a troll to pass. The troll did not notice the branches beginning to sprout, or the vines that began to snake backwards until they wrapped themselves around his wrist and arm. The troll began to try to pry them off, but this was the Yuletide, and the power of the dark and hungry earth was in the holly, and its serrated leaves cut the flesh of the troll as its roots dug into its flesh, seeking the blood and nutrients to fuel its growth. The troll howled in pain as the holly flowered within the body of the troll, consuming the unnatural vitality to fuel its own growth. Soon the howling and twitching stopped, and only the brooding hall with its bright bloodberries stood in the silence of the cavern. The power Neville has been holding since the ritual was expended, he was again just Neville, the boy who would never be his father. Normally, that thought would be enough to break him. Gran says herbology is unbefitting a warrior, that my dad would want me to focus on defense against the dark arts, but Longbottoms have been studying herbology for 1,000 years. It's in our blood. Just because I love growing things doesn't make me weak," Neville said, the ghost of 1,000 old wounds bitter in his voice. Milisent gave his bottom a pinch as she went past. "Strong enough for me, troll killer." She smirked as Neville jumped in surprise. Neville smiled. The lonely boy who could never fill the shadow of his forever suffering but undying father was not alone anymore. Here, far from the Longbottom name and legacy, he had grown into strength of his own, and with friends beside him for when that wasn't enough. The next chamber beyond was clearly Professor Flitwick's task. There was a door bound with runes from Professor Babbage. The great orotulum keyhole being fashioned after the alchemical gold alloy argued that Dumbledore himself had made sure that while the door itself was resistant to any offensive or transformational magic, the lock itself was even further protected. Only the key would open it. There were keys, of course, hundreds of them. Great golden keys, winged like so many snitches, flying and swooping like so many angry birds. They were clearly agitated from the passage of Professor Quirrel, who had done something either unspeakably clever or amazingly powerful to overcome the charms of Professor Flitwick on the hundreds of golden keys to find and use the one legitimate key. Hermione looked at the keys, noting that each of the keys had a long dagger point, and dove with the speed of an arrow as they flew in agitated clouds, like so many magical cruise missiles looking for a target. You know, if we were Ravenclaws, we would have done countless hours of research to find a clever way to magically sort the one key we needed from the flock, and then found some way to overcome the enchantments on the single key we need," Hermione said. Neville looked up and smiled. "Look, there is a single clean sweep 7 in the corner. Whoever set this up was ready for a Gryffindor. A lone hero to take to the sky and seek out the one key we need and somehow get the door open before the other 99 angry birds turn him into feast bacon." Hermione turned to Milisent and asked, What is the Slytherin solution to this problem? Millicent grimaced and shrugged. Same as Dumbledore's, honestly. Trick some idiot Gryffindor into getting himself killed doing it, then get through the open door as he bleeds out. Harry grinned wildly and started to pull something improbably large from the expanded space pouch in his potions belt. It was his own Clean Sweep 7 broom, with its beater's bat hanging off its clip. Fear not, my friends. We will Hufflepuff this out. Hard work, brute force, teamwork, and a complete and utter refusal to consider any smarter options will carry the day. This is the Hufflepuff way. Harry cheered as he tied his beater bat to his wrist and mounted his broom. Milisent and Neville were also grinning and pulling their own brooms from their spatial expansion pouches in their potion belt and tying them to their own wrists. Hermione pulled out her own broom, having neither any experience in Quidditch nor a bat to defend herself from homicidal keys enchanted by the retired dueling Master of Europe and Charms Master of Hogwarts. That is fine for you Quidditch nuts, but I won't last a minute in that clout of murder hornets. I don't have a bat, and can't even keep track of which key is auriculum, not gold. The color difference is very slight after all. Hermione complained, getting on her broom and looking like she was going to shake apart from barely suppressed fear. Harry smiled. Relax, Hermione, you will ride in the center, and Neville, Millicent, and I will run a standard bludger drill to bat away any key that even tries to get near you. You just have to keep the broom circling in the cloud until the mightiest hunter of Hufflepuff makes his debut as a seeker. Harry teased. Hermione, fear making her slower than normal, didn't immediately follow what Harry was saying until Noodle crawled up her leg and wrapped himself around her broomstick, leaving about 4 feet of whipping black serpent free like some sort of broom-mounted whip. This is why I keep Speaker around. He understands who is the mightiest hunter in all of Hufflepuff, in all of Hogwarts. If the golden ball that cannot be eaten was made of meat, or even fruit, I would have won every game before the other monkeys could fight over the other balls you can't eat. Noodle preened as he turned to rub his face against a scared Hermione. Dollar for your service, Mouse Giver. This once the mighty Noodle will hunt for you prey he cannot eat. For all the mice you have given me, I will hunt the magic key. The 3 monkeys will hit things with sticks, which they seem to like to do while rational beings like you and I stay warm and nap. Harry hissed back at Noodle. Did you just call us monkeys? Harry hissed in mock outrage. Pay attention, Speaker. I called you monkeys with sticks. Do not forget your sticks. I cannot save the day and keep Mousegiver safe at the same time. If she is struck, I will be greatly upset. Noodle hissed, giving clear and precise instructions about how the world was to be reshaped for his whim. What about the rest of us? Don't you care if we are killed? Millicent hissed in feigned alarm. I would be most disappointed in you. Grievous injury is allowed, as you are warm and very snugly when the witch who heals has you in the hospital wing. Try hard not to die. If you could keep the 2 dimmer monkeys alive as well, I would consider it to be a personal favor. Noodle hissed, bowing slightly to Millicent. Harry, I think your snake is sexist. Neville said, and Hermione giggled, her tension failing under the ridiculousness of Noodle's very serious proclamations. The strangest Quidditch formation known to Hogwarts took to the sky in what was to Hermione's mind, an attempt to make a 3-electron helium atom or a lithium atom where all 3 electrons had decided to share one shell. Hermione focused on the atomic models and electron shell theory that none of her friends even pretended to understand or care about, to distract her from the very real fear that should be paralyzing her right now, as a swarm of 100 winged keys, with long, sharp arrowheads, began accelerating towards her very pierceable flesh, as if 100 invisible cherubs decided she needed to fall in love right now. She giggled, as the image of 100 mad cherubs shooting arrows at her was much easier to deal with, as the worst she would suffer was a crush. She was relatively certain that the keys were moving fast enough to punch at least as deep as her outstretched hand through any of her tender and mostly required body parts. Hermione decided it was hail. If it was hail, then she could pretend she was driving in her car, and the steady banging of hailstones on the roof could be ignored. The truth that she was racing around in a loose circle at speeds belonging to motor cars, while 3 of her friends deflected murderous crossbow bolts that all seemed to be after the one flying figure that was not madly dodging and fighting. Noodle was in his element. He ignored the swarm of keys seeking their lives. That was monkey work, and he brought 3 very well-trained monkeys to handle it. He was hunting, and he was the mightiest hunter in Hogwarts. "Dollar faster, Mouse Giver. It flees before me." "Run, little bird. Mouse Giver has given me wings," Noodle hissed, as close to a cheer as was reptily possible. Harry took a slash on one cheek. Neville grunted as he took a through-and-through through his calf that was bleeding enough to worry him. Millicent's broom rocked as it lost a chip from a collision, but it missed any of the rune formations and didn't impair function. Hermione learned to follow the direction of Noodle's head and stopped looking ahead altogether. She was beyond thought, beyond fear, and still accelerating. If she thought for a second, she would lose control as she was flying far past her own meager ability to control a broom, but she was simply the extension of Noodle's will, and he called for more speed. Circle after circle, she had been rising higher in the swarm, and Noodle had finally forced the one slightly greenish-tinged gold key, the single orichalcum key in the flock, to the top and out of formation. In a programmed evasion move, the key, realizing it was isolated, dove straight down, and for a second its forward momentum was slowed, and Hermione had closed without noticing. "I am the god of the sky, fear me." Noodle hissed and struck, extending almost full length to catch the orichalcum key in his mouth. Trusting that Hermione would keep flying straight, he let her broom catch up to him before he could fall, and coiled happily to present her the key they sought. "Harry, I have it," Hermione said, not thinking about the next step, as this was her strategy to avoid blind panic. "Right, next loop, dive for the door and stick it in the keyhole. I will land and keep the keys off you while you open the door. Neville, Milisent, do one more lap in the air, keeping as many of them busy as you can. Then when I open the door, fly through, and we will close it behind you." Certain she was going to die, Hermione screwed her eyes closed and turned the key in the lock. It was just hail on the roof. Just hail. A sharp agony in her left buttock brought her back to painful reality, as Harry's deflection of the key was almost in time, and she was stuck looking at a key that drove 4 inches into the door, leaving a trace of her blood on the oak, as the door wiped the key clean of her blood as it penetrated. "Now!" Harry screamed, opening the door. Harry held the door as Neville and Milisent flew through, slamming it to the thunder of dozens of keys, driving themselves into the nearly foot-thick oak, and reinforcing runes with force that would have indeed turned the students into statistics in the Hogwarts survival rate. 4 keys had made it through, but Harry no longer had to play nice, and with a roar, he released some of the power of his own air magic from the ritual. "Ventus!" He roared, and a blast of wind caught the keys before they could start to bank and blasted them into the standing chess pieces of the next room. Hermione and Neville slowly consumed healing potions from their belt, and Milisent swiftly bandaged Neville's deep leg wound. Making a brave face, Neville fumbled 3 times trying to get the cap off a blood replacement potion before Harry took it off and steadied Neville's hand, while he drank the restorative draught. Hermione, standing because the sore bum wouldn't let her sit down, was looking at the chessboard. "Oh, look, more wonderful chances to sacrifice us for the greater good. Notice how there is a place empty for all 4 of us on the white side of the board. Harry is king, because it wouldn't do to have your chosen one die too early, and we get to choose between knight, bishop, and queen. I mean, I get it, you are supposed to sacrifice yourself nobly, but this is laying it on a bit thick." Hermione raged, tears in her eyes. The chessboard was Professor McGonagall's work, great stone figures in the form of wizard chess pieces. Each of them was animated like the great defensive statues of the castle. They were not quite indestructible, but to first-year students, the difference between impossible and highly unlikely was not enough to measure. To attempt to cross the board in anything other than a legal chess move would get you killed. To win the game without losing some or all of your key pieces against any sort of competent opponent was unlikely. McGonagall was an amazing transfiguration professor and one of the greatest witches alive. She was undeniably brilliant. How much of a tactician she was unclear. They could not match her power, but Harry's gift for tactical insight had been growing since their first ritual. Between Quidditch and the readings on strategy, tactics, deception, and espionage that Milisent had been forcing on him, Harry was a lot less of a linear thinker than he used to be. Hufflepuff won by working hard, but unlike Gryffindor, They didn't have to just plow blindly ahead, trusting courage and the right to carry the day. They were not Slytherin to only rely on deception, but people forgot too often. Helga Hufflepuff was one of the most feared of the founders because she worked both smarter and harder. Her house worked hard to teach the same. Harry used to play wizard's chess against Fred and George's younger brother Ron, but when Noodle kept trying to kill Ron's pet rat, Scabbers, not a rat, insisted Noodle, but Scabbers was a family rat passed down from Percy. One too many attempted murders of the beloved family rat, and Ron no longer was willing to play wizard chess with Harry. Honestly, he was just about even with Ron before he refused to play him, but Harry hadn't lost to anyone since. Of course, clever peace exchanges never threatened to kill any friends before either, so that was a thing. Neville took the knight position, which suited him. Milisent took the bishop's spot, the diagonal movement somehow suiting the Slytherin, and Hermione stepped into the queen position with a defiant air. Noodle slid back up Harry's body and hissed softly to him. "Speaker, I do not like this. The board smells of old blood. The pieces cannot be damaged until they move, and nothing I do can harm them," Noodle hissed angrily. While reptiles do not actually process fear, the awareness that reality may not include survival was an irritant they felt free to complain about. In Noodle's specific case, it was becoming true that survival for him included more than himself. Harry knew chess, and Harry knew McGonagall. She was a very straightforward person, not much given to deception. She would be a good player, he assumed, but not a subtle one. Harry wasn't unable to sacrifice pieces. He was unable to sacrifice pieces that were people. This fortified, he had a plan. He would set up a series of sacrifices with a revealed check. If he did it right, he would be able to put McGonagall into check and force her moves after the initial check to keep her from further attacks until her king was pinned. The opening moves worked, and the mid-board became a mass of interlocking pawns, each one supporting either another pawn or more powerful piece on a diagonal, so that no one could take anything without starting a series of exchanges. Then Harry sent Neville deep. He could strike the enemy castle, a very powerful piece, and a good exchange. But instead, Neville struck deep into the flank, taking a poor pawn that threatened nothing but secured both the pawn ahead and a bishop. Neville stepped through the square occupied by the bishop, and with a shouted "Flipendo," caused the enemy pawn to flip backwards and shatter on the square behind. Harry expected McGonagall to withdraw the now vulnerable bishop to safety and allow him to advance his own pawn to take the now unsupported pawn and secure Neville's position. Instead, McGonagall's programmed response was to use the bishop to attack Neville. That was stupid. That exposed McGonagall to mate in 3, but it was too late to do anything. The bishop figure turned and stomped backwards on the diagonal, raising its cross-topped staff over its head and bringing it down like a headsman's axe on poor Neville. He raised his beater bat up and raised a magical shield into flickering light, but he was almost out of magical power after the troll, and neither shield nor bat held. His club and arm shattered as Neville fell broken to the board. Milisent shouted as Harry gave the command that freed her to attack. She dashed across the board, and her shouted "Flipendo" blasted the black bishop off the square. McGonagall's pieces moved to cover the previously exposed castle, but it was too late and the wrong threat. Harry waited painfully for Milisent to set Neville's bones before using her own Skelegro potion to start his bones regrowing and administering a pain potion to stop his shaking. When she signaled she was ready, Harry gave the command that sent her to take a defended enemy pawn. There was another pawn securing it, and Milisent should have been swiftly taken in response, except clearing that square left Hermione, Harry's queen, with a direct line to the enemy king. Revealed check. The enemy king moved sideways. Milisent took the pawn threatening her, and now put the king in check a second time. Forced to retreat, the king moved back, only to see Hermione charge straight across the field to face the king, wand to wand. The king could not take Hermione, as Milisent could reach Hermione's square. The king is not allowed to move into danger. The Black King, who looked the spitting image of Gellert Grindelwald, bowed deeply to Hermione and shattered into 1,000 pieces. "Neville!" Harry shouted, and charged ahead to his wounded friend. "It's okay, Harry. I'm out of magic, bum leg, down an arm. I guess I'll just wait here for you to finish things." Neville said, and put on a brave face over one drawn with a mix of fear, pain, exhaustion, and shame. Neville pretended to be okay, and Harry pretended to believe him. Of such lies are friendships forged. The door beyond the chessboard was lit with scarlet flames, but when the black kind surrendered, the flames died down. The three remaining heroes charged into the gap to see the next room. The flames burst up behind them in hungry fury. The next room was a riddle, potions, and dark arts trap. There was a table with 7 potion vials. Beyond was the last doorway, and it was closed by a black fire. Harry did not have to approach to realize this fire burned more than just flesh. This fire was made from the darkest arts. It burned the soul as well as the flesh. Harry walked over to the potion table and read the riddle. He was honestly pants at riddles. If he was a Ravenclaw, he would have spent half the night sleeping in the hallway, unable to enter the common room. Hermione walked over to the riddle and read it. Then she walked over to the potion vials and sniffed them. She found herself reaching out to pick one when Noodle lunged off Harry's shoulder to strike her hand with an open mouth but retracted fangs. "Mouse giver, do not touch those," Noodle hissed. Hermione staggered back from the table and started laughing. Harry was shocked to see she was crying too. "Did you figure the riddle out, Hermione?" Harry asked. "Of course I figured the riddle out, Harry. Who do you think you are talking to?" she snapped. Then she hugged herself, and Harry pretended not to notice as she smeared snot on her face, trying to wipe her tears and snot away. "Then I remembered the point of all this was to prepare you to sacrifice yourself, and the one who set this up was Snape," she said. She hissed now, angrier than he had ever seen her. "It's a trap, isn't it? I could tell you right now which potion will protect you from the flames, and which potion will allow the two of us to cross back and be safe, but that is the trap." She waved her wand at the table. "The whole thing is covered in compulsions, in legimancy locked in runes, and concentrated into the safe potion." Hermione raged the anger in her voice, a poor fit for his studious friend. "If you take that potion, you will do whatever Dumbledore has programmed in that potion, and you will think it is your idea. Milisent and I will take the other 2 potions and think it is entirely our idea to leave you alone to face Quirrel and the Bloody Mirror," Hermione said, sounding bitter and broken. Milisent grabbed Harry's arm and kept him from stepping to the table. "Hold your badgers there, Hufflepuff. I can practically see your whole save my friends at all cost programming starting to kick in. Stop. Think. Find your inner Slytherin. This game is rigged. Dumbledore has it rigged so that you sacrifice yourself to kill Voldemort, and Voldemort figures he can game it so he gets what he wants and you die anyway. Stop playing by the rules. According to the rules, you die and somebody else wins. Dumbledore, Voldemort, the Tooth Fairy, I don't care. It isn't supposed to be you." Millicent grabbed Harry by both shoulders and began to shake him with each word. "You need to cheat," Millicent said, and while Harry believed her, he didn't know how. Unfortunately for everyone, Hermione really was the smartest witch in her generation, and she had found another way out. While Millicent was talking Harry out of noble suicide, Hermione set about committing probable suicide. She ran into the black flame. She was a fire elemental, and fire was hers to command, hers to embrace, hers to understand. This, however, was fire born in black magic, in soul magic. This was the fire that consumed not just flesh but soul, a fire that no living thing could endure. Hermione felt it burn her, not her flesh. The flames could not touch her flesh. She was fire in every magical sense of the word, and while the heart of the sun would crush her into an infinitely dense speck, that speck would not burn. Yet this was the Yule tide, and she was bound to the circle of the darkest night, the circle of endings, the circle of the dead. Her fire was rooted in the underworld, bound by Neville in the roots of reality far below the earth, quenched by Millicent in the primordial ice that preceded the birth of the universe, and bound by Harry to the mists of Ginnungagap, the chaos from which life and death, being and non-being were first formed. Hermione screamed, as no mortal thing could hang on the bleeding edge between existence and annihilation and not burn. But as she burned, she made that fire that was not fire her own. Her soul writhed in torment that was not allowed to consume her. Her body writhed in fire that hated life with a hunger beyond hunger, but her mind was free. Her mind was a witch who was learning to make fire do as she chose, and she chose this fire to not burn Harry and Millicent. "Cross now," Hermione screamed, and the black of the flame seemed to pass through her flesh and show the shadow of black bone beneath. so that it seemed to be her skull screaming at them to run into the flame, but run they did. Harry and Milisent charged through the black flame, and for a moment the pain was rather more than their minds could process. But they had hit the flame-filled doorway at a run, and they fell into the room quite beyond the fire. Quirrel was there. He stood before the mirror of Erest, his face grey, his lips blue, the stench of garlic from him stronger than ever, yet he gripped his wand firmly, and his muttered incantations and wand motions were smooth and precise as any textbook description. Harry and Milisent both struggled to rise and grab their wands. "Expelliarmus!" shouted Quirrel as he disarmed Harry. "Incarcerus!" Quirrel commanded, as Milisent was wrapped ankle to chin in magical ropes that turned her into a pillar rather than a person. With a casual hand motion, Quirrel summoned Harry's wand and tucked it beneath his belt. Harry grabbed his goblin silver dagger, a metal that no magic would transform or block. "Fulgir!" sneered Quirrel, a lightning bolt lancing from his wand and shocking Harry so bad he dropped his dagger and fell spasming to the ground. "Enough of that, Potter. You're not here to fight. You're here to fetch. Dumbledore rather fancies you as his attack dog, but make no mistake, it is for my master you will be fetching." Quirrel hissed angrily. "You serve Voldemort. I would rather die than fetch anything for you," Harry said, frustration and humiliation at his helplessness making him angry. A voice colder than the grave sounded from behind Quirrel. "Let me speak to the boy. You do not know how to motivate his kind. He's not a coward like you." The voice rasped almost breathlessly, as if the effort to speak was a strain. "Master, are you sure? You are not well. I can do this. I can figure out how the old fool used the mirror to trap the stone. I know Potter is the key. I just need to find out how," Quirrel insisted. "Obey me," the voice hissed in a spell that Quirrel could not understand, but was forced to obey. He unwrapped his turban and turned, showing the grotesque sight of another face and tiny vestigial limbs stuck on the back of Quirrel's head. "Voldemort," hissed Harry in Parseltongue. "Yes, Harry, or what that mudblood bitch of a mother left of me. It was her protection of you that left me this way. Half alive, kept sane only by my own unconquerable will and by my soul anchors. It was you that left me this way, so it's only fitting you would restore me." Voldemort hissed. "You aren't even worth biting, less even than that rotting corpse you ride. You will not touch my speaker. Take what you want and leave. If the corpse you ride could die, I would have killed you already." Noodle hissed. Quirrell asked, his voice rising in fear if not stuttering as he did in class. "Master, what does the beat say?" Quirrell begged. "He says he would strike you down, but he fears your power. Do not worry." Voldemort said, smiling softly. "Taste. I fear his taste. He's rotting so badly I would puke out my soul before his taste would be gone. Do not pretend I fear your monkey." Noodle hissed. "Not even my snake will obey you, Voldemort. You have lost. Nothing you do to me will make me obey you." Harry insisted. Voldemort smiled and whispered. "Accio hostage." The rope-wrapped bundle that was Milisent gave a shriek as she shot from where she was tottering to directly between Voldemort and the mirror of Erest. "Now, boy, face the mirror. Face the trap Dumbledore set for me, and get me the Philosopher's Stone, or I will burn her mind with the Cruciatus Curse before I begin to burn her limbs, or perhaps I will use the Imperius and make you do it," Voldemort said with a slow, silky laugh. "No, don't hurt her," Harry begged. "Dumbledore was right about only one thing. You are stronger alone. Bringing a child was just bringing another weapon to use against you. In the end, all men of power stand alone, boy. It is a pity you didn't learn that before you died." Voldemort rasped into laughter, then coughing as his weakened body was pushing its limits. Harry faced the mirror but shut his eyes. He felt fear, shame, helplessness. He felt cold. Noodle whispered, "What are witch strikes? By time speaker. When I tell you, use the monkey stick." Harry screwed his eyes shut. He did feel cold. Milisent must be working her part of the ritual power into the mirror. Her rune was Isa, the ice stasis. He remembered her talking about how she could use it to slow or stop even runic arrays from working for short periods. She was carrying the power of the whole Yuletide circle, the circle of endings, the heart of the dark, where all souls living and dead were closest to the veil. The mirror of Erest was a soul trap, and magic beyond Harry's understanding, perhaps forever. It was, however, a mirror, and mirrors are made of glass. "What do you see, boy? Do you see the stone? If you give it to me, I will let the bitch live. You won't die, but you will earn your friends' lives by your sacrifice. Isn't that noble?" Voldemort laughed again, so sure of his victory. I see my mother. She's holding a stone in her right hand, and she's saying something. A message for you, Harry said, his eyes screwed closed, frost forming on his eyebrows, and struggling to keep from shaking in the cold. Noodle was already burrowing under Harry's robes for what warmth he could find. What has that bitch to say? Is she ready to watch her son die this time? Is she going to beg me again to spare you? Maybe I will. Maybe if she hands you the stone, I might let you live. Voldemort teased, still confident in his victory. Mom has a message, Voldemort. She says to remind you that glass isn't a solid. It is a slow-moving liquid. Harry said, remembering something from his Muggle school chemistry. Voldemort hissed. What sort of Muggle nonsense is this? Give me the Philosopher's Stone. Harry was shaking now. The cold from the mirror was making his fingers numb. Luckily, playing Quidditch in Scottish December makes gripping the beater bat dangling forgotten from his wrist almost easy. Mom says mirrors are slow-moving liquids, and bad things happen when they stop. Harry shouted and swung his bat. The Mirror of Erest was a remarkable magical object, one that had grown in power and darkness far beyond the point it was controllable. But in the end, when Milisent bound the whole power of the end of the year, the elemental power of cold, the runic purity of stasis, into its substance, it became, for one instant, a very fragile frozen piece of glass. Harry was in Noodle's words a monkey with a stick. No, not a monkey. A painstakingly trained competitive monkey with a stick. One of the best trained monkeys with a stick in Hogwarts, and a monkey with a stick in front of a very breakable magical object he cannot possibly understand. But a monkey with a stick doesn't have to. Harry swung with all the rage in his soul, with all the helplessness for his slaughtered family, with all the shame for all the suffering of his friends to get him here. Harry swung blindly at a big piece of glass directly in front of him that could not move. It took a genius of a wizard 6 years to finish the charms, and runic constructs to make the Mirror of Erest. But once Milisent had frozen it and its enchantments, it took one angry monkey with a stick to shatter it. The mirror shattered, and inside its extra-dimensional trap, all of the souls and objects that had been suspended inside its prison shattered too. Broken across dimensions that could not be mapped and could not be reached, the souls and objects splintered across realities in fragments too small to qualify even as subatomic particles, quite beyond even magic to restore. Rather like Voldemort's grip on reason. With a wordless rage, Voldemort screamed his rage, flooding the half-dead and rotting Quirrel with unreasoning hatred. Quirrel spun and charged Harry, determined to punish the boy for the destruction of his beloved master's dream of renewal. Closing on Harry, he gripped his throat to snap his neck with the unnatural strength the rituals binding Voldemort to his willing body imparted. But the second he touched Harry's flesh, his own began to burn. What is this magic? Quirrel screamed as his hands flaked away like overdone pastry. Harry spread his own hands over Quirrel's face and felt the pain of the burning as something was torn from Quirrel and into Harry. Harry leaned forward and whispered into Quirrel's ear in Parseltongue. Hey, Voldemort, Mom says hi. Harry hissed with a wordless howl. Voldemort's shade exploded from Quirrel's body, cutting off the flow of something that Harry had been drawing through Quirrel's body. He felt it fill his veins, like magic but different. His own power wrapped around it, rather like Noodle wrapped around Mrs. Norris as he gently choked her out. Whatever he had taken, it was Harry's now. Harry crawled over and used his left hand to pick up his dagger. He slowly began to cut away the ropes binding Milisent. Somewhere above, he could hear adult voices and the sounds of powerful spells. Oh, good. Responsible adults were coming. He cut Milisent free, then slumped down beside her. By the time rescue found them, they were both passed out, with an angry Noodle between them, unwilling to let any but the witch who heals touch them. Dumbledore sat with a smile on his face in his office, the picture of serene repose. Fawkes, his phoenix, eyed him warily. The bond they shared was deep enough to react to the constant stream of power Dumbledore was using to connect him to the Elder Wand, sitting placidly in its holder. Only the Phoenix was aware that Dumbledore was far less than a heartbeat away from summoning the death stick to his hand and unleashing the rage that ran through his veins like bottled lighting, searching desperately for a target to strike. I found it, Albus. I found it in the wards. Someone with access and authority, and that is supposed to be only you and me, had disabled the wards for detection of possession and the undead. The undead Albus. You know, who used Inferi to kill so many of us in the last war, and he possessed one of our own teachers and walked right past the wards into the shul. Dumbledore reached across the charmed sherbet lemons that he used to make the students more calm and suggestible. He offered one to Minerva McGonagall, wrapping his own magic around it so that she would not notice the potion until it was already metabolizing and effective. Sherbet lemon, Dumbledore offered. I rather fear we will have to write this off to use of the Imperius. Tom has used that on so many people, forced access to defended areas, and betrayal from so many trusted people with that curse. I cannot abide another witch hunt. So many innocents have been cast into suspicion because of that curse. I won't have another witch hunt among my staff. Dumbledore said, his countenance, that of the beneficent and forgiving saint of the light he had actually named himself. Minerva McGonagall looked every inch the angry cat of her animagus form as she hissed back at him. Witch hunt among your staff. Voldemort was sitting at the staff table. Voldemort was given the care of our youngest and most impressionable students to learn about how to protect themselves from the dark arts. If not among the staff, perhaps we should look higher, McGonagall said, her own hand falling upon her wand with a very conscious move. A challenge. She had as much chance against him with wands drawn as her cat Animagus had against a basilisk, yet she seemed ready to try. He sighed. Of all the positions of power he had won for himself, it was Hogwarts that remained the key. The war had cost him too many of his allied seats in the Wizengamot, and the Iqua was really only able to be effective when terrified of an imminent threat. No, for long-term creation of his network of influence, for shaping the next generation to fulfill the vision he and Gellert began so long ago, controlling their education remained key. Even if sometimes murdering the weaklings who dared to question the champion of the light over the necessary and painful things he must do seemed all but irresistible. Was that what drove Tom to become Voldemort? One too many times of being forced to pretend lesser beings had any place to question those with vision. He popped the lemon drop in his own mouth and felt the calming draught begin to work on him. The suggestion to listen to Dumbledore and accept his wisdom was actually a positive thing when he consumed the drops himself. He learned that from a Muggle self-improvement book. Seeing him eat them often fooled others into believing they were safe. Well, wasn't it safer if they obeyed him? Look what happened when ignorant children chose to ignore the plans of their elders and betters. Now, Minerva, what is important is that you found and corrected the issue. Rather unfortunate that you had to do that because I was away from the castle on an errand to the ministry that proved to be a lie. I had planned on doing the wards myself and not involving other professors. Dumbledore said, smiling softly and trying not to grind his teeth. Of course he planned on doing it himself. He had to put a lot of work into blocking Hogwarts' detection of Voldemort possessing Quirrel. With Voldemort's use of Horcrux, simply killing him would never be enough to stop him. Only the Mirror of Eris could trap him forever, living and bound for all time. For the simple cost of one of his Horcrux, the noble sacrifice of the boy who lived, the wizarding world would be safe from Tom Riddle or Voldemort, as he now named himself, forever. Like Solomon the Wise, he would bottle forever the power he could not kill. It worked for the Genii thousands of years ago. It should have worked for Voldemort today. Except a boy with a stick broke it. Dumbledore felt a tooth crack as he bit down too hard on the sherbet lemon. Damn, have to see Poppy for that later. Dental magic was not something he ever delved into, and an unbalanced bite gave him headaches. There was rather a lot of dark magic used last night. Old magic. Forbidden magic. Dumbledore said, determined to get McGonagall on side to correct Harry Potter from a dangerous dabbling into unsafe and unclean things. There was a bloody zombie running around the school with a lick riding the back of his head, plotting to murder students and steal the one thing that could give him his full power back. Oh, and an immortal body. Something he couldn't even get with all his dark rituals last time. A zombie you invited to be a teacher here. A stone you demanded Nicholas Flamel put in the middle of a school as bait for the worst mass child murderer in history. Even Grindelwald never killed children, Albus. I don't care if they skinned and ate him. I don't care if they sacrificed his heart to Mrs. Norris. If 2 first years are facing the Dark Lord on their own, when the only attack spell we have allowed them is Flipendo, I don't care what they use. I want them to live Albus. They are students, McGonagall said, perhaps not noticing her wand was now in her hand, and tendrils of lightning were wreathing her witch's hat like lightning around a thunder cloud. Minerva was an excellent second. She was a natural-born educator. She ran 90% of the school's actual administration, allowing him to devote his time to advancing the greater good. A vision she was too limited to grasp and too weak to pay the price to make happen. Dumbledore spread his hands and lowered his voice. Gently, Minerva, gently. I agree, with the Mirror of Eris somehow destroyed, something I would have sworn was impossible for any save Tom and myself, then the safety of that boy remains our only hope of salvation. Dumbledore said. The prophesy. McGonagall sighed, and visibly deflated. You know, I never trusted that stuff. I was muggle-raised, and half-blood. I tend to trust what my own magic can do, and what my own senses can see. Divination always seemed like hogwash more than Hogwarts to me. Dumbledore smiled, and yet a first-year boy stood against a fully qualified Hogwarts professor. For whatever else Quirrel was qualified to teach defense against the dark arts in his own right, whatever Voldemort may have also given him. Surely, outside of the prophesy, there can be no other explanation. McGonagall took off her hat and twisted it in her hands. I remember his father, one of my most gifted transfiguration students. Phileas Flitwick still raves about Lily's genius with charms. They followed you into your war and were dead too young, with a baby in the crib left behind. Now you want us to drag the boy into the same war, not even allowed to grow to man before you make him a weapon. McGonagall said, shame and weariness in her voice. He is the boy who lived. The prophesy offers a path to salvation for the whole world, if only he can be guided to follow it. Dumbledore smiled at her as she nodded. No matter how squeamish she may be, not even she can see any other path to salvation for their world but the sacrifice called for so long ago. McGonagall sniffed. He isn't exactly one of my lions. His father and even mother would have agreed with you and charged into the fray to save the world. Harry and his friends are Hufflepuff. They don't go off and have adventures. They run bake sales and rebuild houses. One of them is even a Slytherin, and they are more likely to assassinate than impersonate heroes. McGonagall said in frustration. The children in question should have been hers, but now were more likely to be repotting plants with Professor Sprout or making medical potions with Poppy Pomfrey. Dumbledore smiled. Leave that to me, Minerva. He may have turned to Hufflepuff out of loneliness, but all it takes is a sip from the heady cup of glory to awake the lion in any man. I think I can start him on the path to being the hero the wizarding world needs him to be, and away from the dark practices the old and dark houses traffic with. Dumbledore overrode Poppy Pomfrey in the medical wing to visit Harry. While his legal right to do so was questionable, the list of people who had said no to Dumbledore stands at Gellert, Grindelwald, and Voldemort. Since neither were free or in anything a rational being would claim was healthy, she did not press the point. He cast a mufflato spell with a number of gestures that were not really required. Harry noted the spell took effect before he said or did anything, so the headmaster's visible spellcasting was more or less just theatrics. The degree of power and skill so casually demonstrated reminded Harry that he was like a fly and Dumbledore like a dragon. While both had wings, one of them offered no possible resistance to the other. Ah, Harry. I thought it was time to have a chat about what happened in the forbidden section of the third-floor corridor. Noodle rose up and coiled, seemingly to rest, but Harry noticed his body was coiled to strike, and his tongue flashed out, tasting the air, which he only did to detect illusions and test for suspicious air movements, indicating invisible shields. Noodle seemed ready to kill Dumbledore. Harry found he was not reflexively objecting, and decided to have a good long think about that later. Quirrel took out Snape, and as the only combat-capable wizard left in the whole of Hogwarts, took that chance to steal the Philosopher's Stone and make Voldemort freaking immortal as well as alive, powerful, and without any adult opposition in a school filled with the largely defenseless magical children of his enemies. Objecting to being slaughtered in our beds, we decided, just for a lark, to stop him. If it's any consolation, Hermione looked for the field trip to stop a resurrecting Dark Lord permission form, but could not find one, or we would have asked permission first. Harry had not noticed becoming angry. He remembered his mother's face, his mother's words. To give him the chance to destroy Voldemort, she had given up forever. There was no next great adventure for her. She had given up eternity with his father, had given up being reunited when he died, just to buy Harry a chance to live. Dumbledore and all his talk of sacrifice, it was always someone else who got sacrificed, never him. Harry heard Dumbledore snap, and with his shouted, "Enough!" Harry felt Dumbledore's bare will pinning him to the bed. Noodle struck, and Dumbledore's eyes grew wide as his first passive shield from some object he bore failed under the rune-enhanced magical snake's own power, and his own golden shield flare into visible existence. Dumbledore kept his protections up and palmed his wand. He considered obliviating the boy, but considering Poppy Pomfrey had come from her desk and was watching like a hawk since his shield flared to visible light, she would probably notice an object. Medical oaths rather annoyingly protected her from the obedience oaths that bound the rest of the staff. He sighed softly. He was getting old. This used to be easier. He used to be kinder. The cost of all of those he had been forced to sacrifice only grew heavier over time, and he was so tired of carrying them all. Calm your pet, Harry. Above all other men, I mean you no harm. For reasons you are too young to understand, you are the most important student at Hogwarts. In many very important ways, the most important person in Wizarding Britain. Dumbledore said, using passive legitimacy to read the truth of Harry's words as he played very carefully with the truth of his own. "Dollar if he even points that wand at me, kill him," Harry said softly. "He won't hurt you, Professor," said Harry truthfully. "He will be dead before he knows I have bitten him," agreed Noodle. Dumbledore read only truth in those words, but somehow still felt threatened. When did children lose their ability to trust? He blamed that Slytherin girl and the snake. Slytherin had been Tom's house, and Tom had talked to snakes too. The boy should have been a Gryffindor. Gryffindors did not need to understand, they trusted, and accepted they didn't need to know, they just needed to fight. He was running a war, not a democracy. You are special, Harry. You alone. You have something that Voldemort does not. Your mother gave her life for you out of love, and that love is the power that Voldemort knows not. That is the power that can destroy him, the power he knows not. You alone can face him in the end, protected by that love. Dumbledore smiled. Harry laughed. It started as a giggle, then he laughed so hard he rolled back and forth on the bed. He laughed until he farted. Tears were streaming down his face, and he was gasping for breath as Dumbledore looked on in rising fury. "Love, love," Harry laughed. "What utter bollocks." Harry stopped laughing and raged at Dumbledore. "My dad was loved, and I heard him die. My mom was loved, and I watched Voldemort kill her. Mad-Eye Moody's wife and daughter were loved, and Voldemort killed them himself too. Fred and George's uncles, the Prewitt twins, were loved, and he killed them too. Half my goblin clan died when Voldemort stormed Gringotts for whatever was locked inside that he needed in the last war, and I can tell you they were loved. I have tended their memory stones, stones black with the blood shed by every living member of the clan that pledged their blood and magic to avenge them. If that is supposed to be the power he knows not, then you had better put a lesson in defense against the dark arts on writing your will, because we are all going to die." Harry was crying now, his body slack with spent rage, no longer caring to hide anything. "Should I kill him, Speaker?" Noodle asked softly. "No, Noodle. He is so full of crap you would probably get sick and make Mousegiver mad again," Harry said, and Noodlehead buted him in quiet commiseration. Dumbledore rose and looked at Harry with an unreadable expression before withdrawing from the hospital wing under Poppy Pomfrey's glare. It was time for the great feast, and the 4 first years who saved Hogwarts were to be released from the medical wing to enjoy it. Students had returned from winter break to find the Dada instructor was, in no particular order, a zombie, a Death Eater, Voldemort, and killed by Harry Potter and his band of first-year Hufflepuffs, with tokens Slytherin and Serpent guidance. To say that reaction was mixed was putting it mildly. Luckily, or unluckily, the Quidditch community had gotten the story from the first years in question while still drugged out of their minds on various healing potions and spells. So, how the Beaters saved Hogwarts was, if not the official story in the Daily Prophet, at least circulated on magically duplicated broadsheets in all 4 common rooms. from what was rather disingenuously noted as the Ginger Press. There was in fact a very hot debate between Slytherin and Hufflepuff about who gets to claim Noodle as a Seeker for next year. Gryffindor voted and cheered for whoever was behind, because they found the fight absolutely hilarious, and Ravenclaw looked on in a sort of existential horror. This may explain how, when the time came for the quartet to finally walk down to the Great Hall for the second-term feast, they were not permitted to do so. The Four and Snake, riding Hermione with whom he won Seeker fame, were carried to the Great Hall on palanquins borne by the Quidditch teams of Hufflepuff, Gryffindor, and Slytherin with much ceremony. Professor Snape sneered, Professor Flitwick cheered, Professor McGonagall and Professor Sprout were weepy messes sharing a hug at the staff table. Dumbledore alone was frowning. This was not in the script, and tonight's script was essential in shaping both the wizarding community's understanding of the Yule night battle and shaping young Harry Potter into at last becoming the child of prophecy and accepting at last the mantle of the boy who lived. The students, being students, and Quidditch being the closest to both professional celebrity and shared religion in the wizarding world, were too busy going insane and cheering wildly at the ridiculous sight to notice their headmaster's odd reaction. When the noise died down, Professor Dumbledore took his chance to give the start-of-term speech. Now the great hall hung draped in the green and silver of House Slytherin, as they had won the last House Cup and had a comfortable points lead this year as well. Ravenclaw earned well academically, but lacked the sort of communal spirit to really rack up any extracurricular points, and tended to remain outside of conflicts that didn't concern them, leaving fewer community-based point opportunities. Hufflepuff didn't care about credit, and all sort of pitched in to whatever needed doing. They were far better at doing the work than about taking credit for it. They didn't produce a lot of stellar scholars, but the ones they did produce were so quick to share what they learned that the knowledge and points tended to distribute around them fairly swiftly. This was the first year in ages their Quidditch team was not last, and while not first, they were at least in range to catch second. Gryffindors were in the thick of everything and generated more points than any other house. Since the ratio of good and bad points shifted wildly, or sometimes Weasley, on any given day they soared or plummeted up and down the ranks. Slytherin worked smarter, not harder, but the House of Ambition was all about success, and it showed. Their unchallenged Quidditch mastery was being challenged for once, but their constant concentration on areas of greatest reward to effort ratio, and having a head of house that could award Slytherin as many as 12 points for good breeding, and Dark Gryffindor as many for the crime of breathing in a single class, Slytherin had a comfortable points lead for the House Cup. Dumbledore understood the house point system was about peer pressure, and using the pressure of your housemates to instill the behaviors in students that the professors desired without their having to try to trail hundreds of the little feral beasts themselves. It was time to use this system to simultaneously reward and isolate the boy who needed to become a hero. Rising to his feet and pointing his wand to his throat to activate the sonorous charm and amplify his voice perfectly throughout the hall, he began. While it is tradition to award the House Cup only at the end of the year, this has been quite an unprecedented year, and I think you will have to bear with me as we take an unprecedented look at Tay House standings. In fourth place is Hufflepuff with 312 points. While the House of Hard Work, it seems they can be a little too hard on cauldrons, and considering how much replacing them eats into Professor Snape's potions budget, that has been a bit costly. Dumbledore smiled apologetically at Professor Sprout, and Professor Snape glared as House Slytherin and a good portion of Gryffindor laughed uproariously, pointing to Potter and Longbottom, who waved in bemused embarrassment. In third place, Gryffindor with 350 points, the best Quidditch showing in the last decade. Yes, yes, give a roar, you lions. Yet also the second highest detention total since the glory days of the Marauders. Yes, yes, you know who you are, and so do we. Dumbledore smiled and shook his finger at a pair of Weasleys who looked comically affronted. In second place is Ravenclaw with 426 points. Well done, Ravenclaw, well done. Dumbledore beamed, bowing towards the diminutive Professor Flitwick, who puffed out his chest in a very goblin pride at the achievements of his house. And in first place is Slytherin with 472 points. Dumbledore paused as the Slytherins broke their usual icy control to cheer, for if the ambitious do not revel in their victory deeply, they will not be driven to the next one as strongly. Yes, yes. Well done, Slytherin, well done. Dumbledore boomed, but his eyes were twinkling and settled on Harry. Harry could feel a growing sense of alarm. What was he planning? Yet it seems we must take recent events into account. As I said, these were unprecedented events and deserve an unprecedented action. I have given the matter much thought, and as is my right as headmaster, assigned a few additional awards for cool use of intellect in the face of fire which surely could have injured her, to Hermione Granger 50 points for Hufflepuff. Hermione felt a look of shock and horror steal over her face. Harry Darla, she hissed in Parseltongue. He thinks I solved the riddle and drank the potion. He thinks I am under his magical compulsion. If he figures out I used ritual magic and elemental affinity to beat the trap, we are in trouble. She hissed in fear and a most un-Hufflepuff paranoia. Dumbledore continued, unaware that Hermione had not in fact bothered with the riddle, and poisoned herself with the potion Dumbledore had intended to control and compel Harry into self-sacrifice. For Mr. Longbottom, who had the courage and the loyalty to sacrifice himself for his friends in the most demanding game of wizard's chess Hogwarts has ever seen, I award Hufflepuff 50 points. Your parents would be so proud. Dumbledore said, unaware the balling of Neville's fist and red in his face were rage, not embarrassment, at having his parents' living death for following Dumbledore again waved in his face. Harry frowned, turning to his friends and complaining loudly enough for the whole table to hear. Hey, is he stealing the house cup for us? That isn't right. Harry complained. Hermione looked up and shook her head. Don't worry. Even if he gave you 60 points, we would be tied at best. He still has to award Milisent too. Even if he gives her a single point, Slytherin still ends up with the cup. I mean, they had a 160-point lead on us. Hermione offered, her faith in the fairness of teachers and the accuracy of textbooks being legendary for its fanaticism, rather than its evidentiary basis. Dumbledore touched his throat again and whispered something. A new depth filled his voice, and his words reached not just the students' ears, but their minds and hearts as well. This was an active use of legimancy to affect the core beliefs of all who heard it, without strong occlumency shields or the defense of an heir's ring to a noble house with its own inbuilt protections. Lastly, to Mr. Harry Potter, for having the courage to stand alone against the Dark Lord, to defy Voldemort himself without even a wand to defend himself, I award Hufflepuff House 70 points. A roar of approval came from Gryffindor and Ravenclaw, and those Hufflepuff too far away to have heard Harry's earlier objections. Rather than continuing on to award Milisent and Slytherin House its points for her brave, and above all else, cunning, actions in the final confrontation, Dumbledore pointed his wand to the decorations around the hall, and the Slytherin green and silver quickly turned into the gold and prancing badgers of Hufflepuff. Dumbledore concluded happily, having planted the seed into minds made magically suggestive due to his legimancy-enhanced speech, and the very subtle magics enhancing the headmaster's authority when he spoke to the students. Now both Harry and everyone else accepted that Harry was destined to stand alone against the Dark Lord. When the time came, even his best friends would smile and push him forward alone. After all, the prophesy only needed him to sacrifice one more child. He didn't need to carry the weight of any more. Dumbledore smiled. Harry would be the last. Even the greater good could ask no more of him. Hermione's dawning horror finally shattered the dam of her reserve. She stood up and pointed at a stony-faced Millicent Bulstrode who was clapping for her friends and swallowing the lack of her due respect. She was a half-blood daughter in a pure-blood house. She was used to it. Millicent was with us. Millicent fought too, and she gets nothing. That isn't fair. Hermione shouted. Neville rose. No, we didn't earn this. This isn't right. Harry rose. He drew his wand and cast Sonorous. Harry began turn to the House of Badgers and began to hammer his wand into the table in time with his chant. No thing not earned. He began the chant, but Neville and Hermione touched their wand to their throat to cast Sonorous on themselves, and soon 3 of them were chanting and hammering the table together. A dozen, then 2 dozen, soon half of Hufflepuff was hammering the table and chanting together. No thing not earned. They roared. Dumbledore's booming voice cut through the students' best efforts with power and enough anger to terrify those who hadn't already worked themselves into a frenzy. "Prefects," Dumbledore roared. "Control your house," the headmaster ordered. To be a prefect is to be the hand of the school's authority among your fellow students. You were a student, but at the same time you were part of the administration. You were an extension of your house. The House of Badgers, the House of Duffers, the House of Nobody Else Wants Me. The nicknames for Hufflepuff House are as many as they are derogatory. However, not Slytherin in their malice, not Gryffindor in their arrogance, not Ravenclaw in their superiority ever outright attacked Hufflepuff. House Hufflepuff defends its own. The House of Badgers is hard to rouse, but impossible to quell. When you come for one, you face them all. Helga Hufflepuff was the founder who cherished those who worked hard, accepted the cost of what needed to be done, and took no thing unearned. What they did not do ever was back down. Cedric Diggory felt Dumbledore's words hit his mind, backed by the power of his legitimacy. Cedric was not just a Hufflepuff. In many ways, Cedric was the Hufflepuff, the most Hufflepuff of Hufflepuff. He heard the headmaster's demand that he stop his juniors, dug in his claws, and snarled back. "No thing unearned," boomed out in his classically trained baritone, and by the next repetition, all the Hufflepuff prefects and seniors had joined the chant. Dumbledore had turned and begun arguing with Professor Sprout, only to have Professor McGonagall step between them and get directly in the headmaster's face, in an argument kept private by both sound masking and slight veiling charms to prevent lip reading. Professor Sprout, a stout-looking woman who wore her formal robes with more charm than elegance, marched towards the Hufflepuff house banners surrounding the great hall like a rather plump badger come to very angry life. With an angry wave of her wand, she cast Vexillum Restitu. One banner reverted from Hufflepuff gold to Slytherin green and silver. Poppy Pomfrey, the Mediwitch being another Hogwarts staff member of Hufflepuff origin, strode to the other side of the hall, bowed to Madame Pomfrey, and set about changing the other side. Vexillium Restitu. The two Hufflepuff professors chanted, one by one brute force transforming what had reshaped itself from Slytherin to Hufflepuff with a lazy wave and whispered word of the headmaster. Yet he was wrong. Hufflepuff hadn't earned it. If it took a lot of hard work to change it back, well, they were Hufflepuff. They were not afraid of a little hard work. Harry felt a hand come down on his shoulder and squeeze. He looked up into the troubled eyes of Professor Dumbledore looking down on him and frowning. "I don't understand your objection, Harry. I only sought to honor you for your sacrifice. The whole school, the whole of Wizarding Britain owes you at least that much," Dumbledore said, his eyes probing, as at last he drove his matchless mind in active legitimacy into the mind of the boy who lived to find out what he needed to do to control him. Dumbledore fell back with a cry, as his mind dove deep into Harry's mind, only to recoil in blind terror from the Black Serpent, glowing with eldritch runes of power that coiled deep within Harry's mind, just waiting for prey to enter. As Harry stepped past his professor to go apologize to Milisent, her own contribution being utterly ignored by everyone, he offered Dumbledore the secret he had been trying to steal. "There are really only two things you have to understand about me, Professor. The only person who calls it a sacrifice is the one making it. Everyone else is just a murderer," Harry said as he walked away. Dumbledore asked in confusion, and the second. Harry just shook his head. The whole of the Hufflepuff table chanting, "No thing unearned," utterly unheard behind the headmaster. 13. Chapter 13. Serpentine Succession. Harry Potter, Serpentine Succession, covering the events of the Chamber of Secrets, Harry Potter, No Thing Unearned, Book 2, usual disclaimer. Harry Potter, the characters, setting, and world thereof remain the property of J.K. Rowling. This is a work of fan fiction offered not for profit. The only character I claim as original is Noodle, and he writes himself. I just stay out of the way. If you disagree with what the characters are doing, they are following the growth they experienced from the choices and experiences that shaped them in the last books as filtered through the somewhat jaundiced lens of a veteran with questionable interpersonal skills. If you don't like it, write a better one, and I will probably read it. Chapter 13. Summer Fun at Home. Harry Potter was not enjoying his summer. When normal children come home from school covered with wounds, accused of murdering their professor, and or defeating a returning Dark Lord, they face questions about why they endangered themselves. Why didn't they report to authorities? Why didn't they think about their parents before endangering themselves? Goblin children, on the other hand, face a somewhat different interrogation. Axe Master One Thumb swept Harry's legs from under him with a hook of his blade, then brought his axe down in a reverse stroke that would have cut Harry in half if he didn't roll away from his own axe in desperation. Defeat the Dark Lord. Killed a fully grown wizard. What have you to show for it? You pathetic waste of the resources of clan and cavern. You brought down Voldemort, slayer of 17 of the clan, looter of the sacred vaults, and what have you to show for it? One Thumb snarled, not even breathing hard as he casually punished Harry Potter, son of Griphook, for the shame of facing the enemies of his clan in combat and not exacting even a nut or sickle in recompense. Harry got to his feet, but the pathetic wizard's shield, his muttered, Pratigo, failed before the goblin's silver of the two-handed axe, and Harry felt it slice deep into the flesh of his left shoulder and down to the elbow. The cold feeling of shock and blood loss washed over him. Goblins fought for profit, and Harry had killed somewhere between 0 and 2 sworn enemies of his clan and hadn't even come away with the change in their pockets. To say that this shamed his entire living clan was grossly misstating it. He shamed ancestors so ancient he needed a new language to properly name them. Goblins believed in positive reinforcement. They believed that if you barely survived correction for your misdeeds, you would make a positive effort to avoid repeating them. Harry tried to convince Griphook that is not what positive reinforcement actually meant, but he was sure there was some critical bit of gobbledygook to English he was getting wrong, as his father and mother were watching him get cut apart in the ring with expressions of cold disinterest. Axe Master One Thumb looked down on Harry and smiled in condescension. The same smile Voldemort held in his memory every single night when he got to relive the death of his mother. The same smile Dumbledore gave him, and he played his little games and made Harry dance like some imperious puppet on his little strings. The smile of the predator to prey, the smile of the powerful to the powerless. The smile that reminded Harry that those he loved were his only until someone stronger chose to take them away. Something cold roused in Harry. Something he didn't recognize rose within his soul, sliding into his mind, and magic like a hand into a long-abandoned glove. The hand slid into the glove and reached out to Harry's wand. The helpless rage of a powerless boy was swept away by something cold, dark, and hungry. The runes on his skin burned with lightning, green jagged sparks, arced over the burning silver-wrought lightning scar of his forehead's Soelo rune, and Harry raised up eyes blazing in the green fire of the killing curse. His voice was not the screamed rage of a child, but the cold anger of a vengeful god. Crucio, Harry spoke the unforgivable torture curse in Parseltongue, and the blood-red serpent left his wand towards Axe Master One Thumb. Axe Master One Thumb had survived when Voldemort came to Gringots in the last war. Had survived, but one thumb, one eye, and half his face had been lost to the dark curse that had consumed the rest of his squad. He had carved the life from more than one arrogant wizard, but he remembered well the helplessness he felt when Voldemort and his hand picked followers. Bellatrix Lestrange, Rockwood, the Lestrange brothers, and Barty Crouch Jr. had slaughtered casually the survivors after Voldemort had shattered every defense that should have held against any living wizard. He was well trained. A century of battle had beaten any mercy or fear from his goblin blood and bones. He didn't hesitate or flinch as his axe flashed to interpose the goblin's silver broad head of his axe between the torture curse and his flesh. His one eye widened as the blood-red curse wove around his blade, cold, dark eyes deeper than the abyss opened from the blood-red bolt, and a gaping more marked by long, sharp fangs grew as the blood-red bolt turned into a living, hissing serpent made of pain and hatred. It hit Axe Master One Thumb and drove him up against the runic constructs of the training ring. The runes of the training ring flashed into bright, burning life, the limiters on pain and physical damage triggering as the Crucio curse pushed beyond the identified safe limits, even for goblin training. The serpent of scarlet hatred pinned Axe Master One Thumb in mid-air, pushed into the ward so powerfully they burned into his back, even as the goblin silver of his heirloom armor ran in rivulets down his body, burning his flesh as they went. One thumb screamed and screamed, his bones flashing visibly through flesh rendered translucent by the scarlet power of magic made into living malice, a soul-deep hatred of all life that existed only to teach life to welcome death. Harry rose to his feet, blood pumping from his left arm, his right arm extending like a spear towards his writhing and shrieking enemy. With a casual flip of contempt, he flicked downward and right, and the snake tossed Axe Master one thumb to the floor. Harry allowed his wand arm to fall down to the ground, the wand held loosely but ready in the manner Griphook knew spoke of the instant willingness to resume battle. Banishing the wards with a mutter, he stepped slowly to his son and smiled. While Frithweaver shot to his side, bandages and potions ready to heal his physical wounds, Griphook stared into the vulnerable depths of his son's eyes. Griphook nodded slowly. Harry was struggling to process the potential he had just found inside him, not just the magic. Harry was born to magical power. His father was the product of an ancient line of mages that shook the world with their tread, but his mother was something wilder and less knowable. From her came a connection to magic, unbound by the rules of the pure blood and the traditions of the wizards that turned sideways from the muggle world and walked away. Harry was struggling with the monster inside. Griphook reached out and took his son by the shoulders. "So, you did not face the enemy of both your houses and come away empty-handed," Griphook said. Harry's face snapped into fear and revulsion as he realized that the power and knowledge he just used to break and torture a goblin war master was stolen from Voldemort, probably from the last battle at Yule. Frithweaver's maternal hand snapped up and slapped him so hard he almost fell. He turned to face her, and she gripped his face in both her clawed hands. "Never turn aside from the power you need to defend what is yours. Pry it from the flesh of your enemies, loot it from their corpses, or tear it screaming from their minds. I do not care. My son is no man's sacrifice. Whatever you must become, you will come home again." Harry turned to Griphook and Frithweaver, trying to explain that what he had done was wrong and evil. "Mom, Dad, that was Crucio, the torture curse. It is one of the 3 unforgivable curses. To use it is to go to Azkaban for life. Worse, the version I cast was in Parsleytongue. The only wizard in living memory who ever cast it was Voldemort. You can't shield against it, and once it has you, not even Dumbledore can do more than scream," Harry said, trying to explain how ashamed he felt right now. Griphook dug his fingers into his human son's shoulders. It was time he learned a few bitter truths they would never teach at Hogwarts. There is the way the world is taught, and the way it actually works. No son of his could afford the illusions of the privileged pure bloods in their ivory towers. That curse is unforgivable cast upon wizards. They use it against our kind all the time. Under your precious ministry, the unforgivable curses are only unforgivable against wizards in good standing. It is perfectly legal to use them against anything that isn't human enough for them under the law of the moment. There have been times it was legal to use against muggles, mudbloods, and half-bloods. Even today, you can use it against anything that isn't listed as pure human by the Ministry of Magic, and while they may bluster, no law will touch you. Be aware, as a legal goblin, they may use it against you. Obey your mother. Win your battles and come home. If Wizarding Britain marches after you, then I guess the goblins go to war." Griphook spoke loudly. Harry looked up to see Axe Master one thumb stagger over and cuff Harry roughly alongside the head. "Finally, you are living up to your bloodline. You took this weapon from your enemy. That is a good start. Every scrap of power, every piece of gold, every drop of blood. Do not leave them even the memory of their name. That is goblin vengeance." Harry looked into Frithweaver's face and Griphook's. He remembered the green fury of his mother's gaze as she came to him, bound in the agony of her own death until she could finish dragging Voldemort down with her, and finally accepted what he was. He wasn't Dumbledore's boy who lived. He was Lilly Potter's boy who would live. He was Frithweaver and Griphook's son who would survive to come home. He looked down and noticed that the blood from his left arm had spattered his Harley and Phoenix feather wand. He watched as the wand slowly seemed to soak up the blood. Somewhere inside he knew that was wrong, but he couldn't bring himself to care. Outside Gringots, a house elf pulled his ears. He could not breach the wards of Gringots. He had to. He had to stop Harry Potter from returning to Hogwarts. If Darby did not stop Harry Potter from returning to Hogwarts, then Harry Potter would die. What had nasty master said? That goblin filth and his precious friends. A half-blood bastard shaming a pure-blood house. A cowardly blood traitor who should have remained a squib, and a muggle-born who is too stupid to realize she has no place among us. Darby smiled. If he could not reach Harry Potter, he would reach Harry Potter's friends. Harry Potter would stay safe with the goblins if his friends were not returning to Hogwarts. Harry Potter would thank Darby if only he knew. Even Azkaban was safer than Hogwarts this year. Darby would see Harry Potter's friends safe. Safe in Azkaban if he had to. Hermione's home life hell Hermione Granger was not having a good summer. She was a good girl, a studious girl, and above all a gentle one. Or at least that is who everyone remembered her being. To be fair, everyone included Hermione. What she was beginning to realize is that Hermione Granger was like last winter's glove. It looked like she remembered, but she couldn't seem to make it fit anymore. The decree for the reasonable restriction of underage magic was not the very sane act of child protection that Hermione had learned from her Welcome to the Wizarding World ministry textbook her summer before Hogwarts. It took a winter with Milisent Bulstrode, half-blood daughter of a noble house, raised like an insider with an outsider's perspective, and a mind that was Slytherin to its last scale and Fang to explain it. This was a law that existed to keep the Muggle-born forever down. No Muggle-born would be allowed to practice magic, because the trace on their wands would report any underage magic use, which would be blocked by any half-capable wards, and magic used in any Muggle areas, that is areas without a registered witch or wizard, set off an automatic complaint process targeting whichever Muggle-born underage student lived closet to the incident. If the targeted witch or wizard did not know they had the right to demand an aura report within 24 HRS to confirm the underage witch or wizard's wand did not in fact show any prior incantations during the period of the violation, the automatic warning became a strike. At 3 strikes, your wand was broken and you were expelled. Milisent confirmed that many Muggle-born who embarrassed the purebloods had been stricken from the rolls of Hogwarts over the centuries. Everyone knew it, but even the tolerant light faction that condemned the dark faction for anti-Muggle violence smirked quietly from the sidelines, as pure-blooded of all sides, expected to always be better than Muggle-born at magic, and reacted badly when they were proven wrong. Hermione had begun her summer with what she described as growing pains. She returned to her Muggle neighborhood from boarding school with a cauldron and enough ingredients to last her a productive summer of brewing and experimentation. She had enough arithmancy texts and rune texts to allow her to advance her knowledge of enchantment to a useful level. All of this could be done without a wand and without setting off the trace. Then Hermione went for her morning jog. Hermione had not gone into the whole beta warrior goblin mania her 3 friends had, but she had very much been made aware that her friends could concentrate longer and consistently produce more and steadier magical power due to their heightened aerobic fitness. Hermione was entirely an empiricist. If it worked, she would adopt it. Jogging became as much a part of her school routine as revision and encoding all advanced research in Parsleytongue in case it got illegal and interesting at the same time. Hermione had forgotten about bullies. It was funny, at the beginning of first year, boys still thought they could bully girls due to the physical differences. It lasted a little bit longer because well-raised pure-blood girls didn't go for combat-related magic, except when they did. Boys made note of those witches that hunted back and left them alone. Those witches were not the good marriageable girls. They were the Lily Evans, Bellatrix Lestrange, Cassiopeia Black, Lucretia Borgia, Elizabeth Bathory, and Morgana Le Fay. They were the things that you talked about in whispers, but not while they were looking. Hermione had not set out to become one of those witches, and had not noticed how much less complicated her life became when it happened anyway. People didn't bully Hermione Granger anymore. She had been jogging, unaware that she had been assuming a degree of immunity that came from being a lot more dangerous with a wand than any first year had a right to be, when she ran into Tina Trimble, Christina, but only substitute teachers ever called her that, and never twice, and her group of would-be boyfriends and general minions. Tina would understand pure-blood ideology perfectly. While she was a Muggle, and would be nothing but prey to the pure-blooded bigots. The degree of assumed privilege they shared united them in spirit. Hermione's parents were both dentists. While very well off, and with assets that put them into the low millions, they were not super rich, nor were they inherited rich. They got where they were through hard work and ability, not by social connections and the web of power that Tina was raised to be a future spider queen, ruling from the comfortable center of that all-important web. The Grangers didn't care about that web of connections, and Hermione never understood her proper place on the ground, looking up in mute worship of her betters. Worse, the daft little commoner had left to a private school, so private that all her best connections could get was a simple, "If they don't ask for you by name, you may as well not exist. Let it go." To say, Tina did not take it well that Hermione Granger was important enough to be asked by name by a group powerful enough to ignore her own family's connections was intolerable. They caught Hermione about 6 blocks from home. It was pouring rain, and Hermione honestly didn't give the 3 BMW much thought as they waited at the side of the road. It was early on a Tuesday morning, and any number of party people were dragging themselves back, while any number of business people were already out attacking the day. It was that kind of district. People moved fast whether they were part of the daylight world or the night side. Hermione almost found it restful as it reminded her a bit of Hogwarts. That restfulness ended when a window rolled down and Tina called out to her from one of the cars she had been passing. "Hey, squirrel girl." Hermione had a second or two before it occurred to her that insult was intended for her. Poppy Pomfrey corrected her teeth with a little well-applied dental magic that also corrected some wisdom teeth buds that were never going to do anything except overcrowd her jaw later, and were best just convinced with a touch of magic to melt back into the jaw and let useful teeth get about their business. Hermione did not stop running as she processed. She was only 3 kilometers into her morning 5, and working on how to blend sound suppression with Muggle notice-me-nots for her footwear so she could jog unnoticed by the boys who kept making remarks about her workout wear. Tina was not happy, and the doors of the BMW to the front swung open and blocked the sidewalk. So did the ones behind. "Hey, Granger, I'm talking to you," Tina shouted. Hermione stopped, turned to face Tina, and noted the group of 8 boys around her. Older boys. Great. Tina was a problem with her own age minions. Borrowing from her family's hangers-on in senior high seemed excessive. She sneered and reached for her wand and froze. No wand. She didn't bring it because she couldn't use it. "I hear you got carted off to some private school, probably all girls knowing how ugly you were when you left. Isn't it lucky for you? I brought a few boys for you to meet." Tina smiled nastily as she held up her phone camera. "No one will believe you got a date, so don't worry, I will record it for you." Tina smirked. Hermione was reaching for her fire when she froze again. No, even without her wand she could burn these abusive idiots down to the ground and their cars with them. Use of magic before Muggles, especially recorded and broadcast, would get her expelled. Hermione panicked. She reached behind her and grabbed a gift from Fred and George Weasley, a dung bomb. She had kept it in her fanny pack, telling herself it wasn't materially any different than mace or pepper spray, and certainly not illegal under Muggle or magical law. She had honestly kept it as a defense against the occasional off-leash dog that she ran into, the owners being sure that sweet baby Soul Ripper wouldn't hurt a fly, never thinking that without a wand, and unable to call upon her fire, she was totally helpless in the Muggle world. Hands already closed on her right arm, she dropped one dung bomb at her feet, and with her breath held, tossed the other one in Tina's car window. Hermione bolted as the boys just out for a bit of fun encountered a girl that didn't honestly feel like either prey or fun. She vaulted the first fence she came to and cut through the yard, vaulting the second fence and doubling back to the dedicated bike lane that ran home. You could not outrun a BMW, even if the driver was struggling to breathe or see through the best of Zonko's dung-bomb goodness. You could certainly outrun a bunch of vicious rich kids who never ran anything but their mouths if they were forced to get out of their car and run. Never again. She was supposed to be the cleverest witch in her generation. While she did not hold with the Muggle baiting and Muggle bashing that wizarding society held, she was aware that as a real witch, Muggle society would indeed resume the burnings or worse if they had the ability. Muggle or wizard, those with a monopoly on power, were not gentle with those who commanded a power they couldn't take away with the stroke of a pen and a new rigged law. Hermione would not be helpless in this world, or the wizard one. She had to make a phone call to Professor Sprout. The professor had a Muggle landline for her Hufflepuffs to reach her in summer. More important, she could send a post owl. Hermione was a reasonable English schoolgirl once, but it was time to admit those days were past. Time to owl a goblin about a gun. Hermione Granger must not return to Hogwarts. A squeaky voice called out from behind her in her own basement. Without a thought, Hermione summoned fire to her hand, and with the little sister of a star blazing around her fist, turned to see the strangest creature in her young life. It was about 3 feet high, like a really underfed goblin. It cowered before her like no goblin could. It wore a tattered tea towel like a toga with a crest on it, so frayed she could make out little about it. It had large bat-like ears that seemed oddly frayed, and a bit wilty like old cabbage. Its eyes were wide, liquid, and sensitive like a puppy that had been kicked too often and lied to about treats, but still in its heart of hearts wanted to believe that this time there was indeed a treat. "What are you?" Hermione asked, curiosity trumping fear in the way it often did for her. "Darby is a house elf mistress." The house elf, whatever that was, said, then looked horrified. "Bad Darby, bad Darby." He chanted, then rammed his head into the metalwork bench. She was engraving bits of beryl with silencing and heat dissipation runes, bits of slide being worked with, Muggle notice me not charms, and a confundus array to disguise its magnetic signature from metal detectors. The expansion charm on the small detached box would only arouse questions wondering why the trunk expansion charm was being put on something barely larger than a Muggle cigarette lighter and smaller than a chocolate frog. "Stop that," Hermione ordered, not particularly wanting her Muggle parents to notice what was on her enchanting bench until its runes were fine-tuned enough to be assured they would function without interference. Darby stopped, blinked, and repeated, "Hermione Granger must not return to Hogwarts this year," Darby said sincerely, wringing his hands. Hermione was not willing to give up her future on the say-so of what looked like a bat crossed with a particularly dim 5-year-old wearing a tea towel. Plus, she was being actively hunted by the local billionaire's brat and her devoted parasites, so not really promising a smooth and enjoyable Muggle existence just then. "No. I am going back. I am going to pass my owls with ease, my newts with record scores, and whatever pureblood prat sent you can just deal with never being half as good as a Muggle born at whatever he couldn't be asked to actually work at for himself," Hermione stated. "Or herself," Hermione said, kicking herself for the automatic gender assumptions. Women could be both powerful and horrible too, after all. "Himself, mistress, but Master doesn't know. Master would punish Darby if he knew." "Hermione Granger must not go to Hogwarts, or Harry Potter will go to Hogwarts, then Harry Potter will die," Darby said, dissolving in sobs and collapsing to his knees. Hermione stopped. Okay, this was not what she was expecting at all. She didn't actually know how to proceed. She can't go or Harry dies. "You want to stop Harry from going, but can't reach him. Is that right?" Hermione said, checking her sums the way she did with arithmancy before applying power to any array. "Harry Potter is behind goblin wards." Darby shuddered and shook in fear. "And Neville?" Hermione asked. "Longbottom Manor has plants with roots between the worlds." Darby tried to apparate in, but the plants were waiting for Darby. They would eat Darby. The house elf looked appalled that the Longbottoms would dare to defend themselves with potted murder plants that ate uninvited teleporters. Hermione made a note not to drop herbology. There were bits she hadn't got to yet that sounded interesting. "Milisent," Hermione said. "Bulstrode Manor is dark, mistress. Things scream in the walls, things that won't be allowed to die, things that watch. They are so hungry and so lonely. They want intruders to try to reach past them. Darby does not know if he could get past them. Darby is afraid they might let him in." Darby said in a tone that implied rather strongly that let in no way implied let out again. "Well, that is the old dark families for you. Utterly horrible answers to commonplace questions. They probably have a bug zapper for garden parties that runs on the souls of trapped fairies. Honestly, they wonder why everyone not raised in those madhouses gives them the side eye every time they talk about home." Hermione said with a sigh. Well, I am going back, and there is nothing you can do about it. Hermione stated firmly. Darby smiled. Darby thinks there is. He snapped his fingers once, and the lights went out. He snapped his fingers again, and a great ball of light, the perfect duplicate of a Lumos spell looped with intent and infused with enough power to persist for the night, hung in her basement workroom, identical to the ones she cast in her dorm room to study, or in the workrooms when she needed better light and no shadows to do fine runework. Bugger, Hermione swore. Hermione, there is an owl for you upstairs. The letter on it has a very important-looking seal on it. The voice of her father came from upstairs. That was fast. So fast that someone had indeed put her on a watch list to catch any misuse of magic as a pretext to kick her out. Could be Malfoy, honestly. It could be any of 100 people, including Ron Bloody Weasley, whose inferiority complex got triggered by her ability and work ethic. Darby smiled softly. Hermione Granger must not go back to Hogwarts. Hermione punted the house elf like a soccer ball, the unaccustomed violence shocking both Darby and herself, but she was just beginning to discover who she was and who she had the potential to become. Hogwarts wasn't a place, it was her life, and someone was trying to take it away for bloody boy who lived hippogriff droppings. Morgana's tits, Dad. Do not let that owl leave. I need to give a response. Her parents were shocked and horrified that Hermione dared to swear or give orders. Luckily, the ministry post owl was self-important and entitled as the junior bureaucrats it served and had no intention of leaving until it got its treat. Them's the rules. Service provided, tip your owl even if it's your arrest warrant. That is the basis of wizarding civilization. Hermione grabbed and upended the owl. She wrote with her wand on the unopened envelope. Per Ministerial Regulations, Decree 13, on the reasonable restriction on underage magic, Paragraph 4, Subsection C. I hereby demand and aura verify that the wand of the accused Hermione Granger has not cast any magic since departure from Hogwarts, and have written confirmation of the removal of the automatic violation notice. You have 24 hours to comply. She fed the owl one owl treat, then looked it squarely in the eye and whispered to it, holding a fresh quarter chicken breast in one hand. I will give you this if you return this letter to the prat who sent it and poop on his desk. The owl eyed the chicken breast, clacked his beak, and let Hermione stroke his feathers and scratch the bit just below the wing's mid-back you can never get to. He couldn't remember the last time any of the ministry clods bothered to give him fresh chicken or a good scratch. He hooted twice, nodded and bolted down his chicken. He would fly hard, that always speeded his digestion. He had a double delivery to make. Hermione Jean Granger, her mother said, invoking the ancient power of the middle name to alert an errant child as to their imminent and justifiable doom. We do not swear in this house, nor do we commit vandalism by bird to government offices. Mom said, in righteous fury. Hermione remembered a time she would have said and felt the same. She felt sad and somewhat hollow. Something had been lost, and she couldn't quite remember what it was, only that the place it used to be held something rather larger and harder now, something that she needed. Not in peacetime, Mom, Hermione said sadly. We aren't in peacetime anymore. Some coward has declared war on me for the crime of being born your daughter. Crime I don't have the grace to be ashamed of. Because I was born your daughter, they want to take my magic away. They will lie, cheat, pervert, and corrupt the law to make sure I get my magic taken away before I become a legal adult, and they will no longer dare to get in my way. Hermione flinched inside to see her mother and father shrink away from her. Hermione had not noticed the fire wreathing her head like a crown, like a halo of flames, as she swore her defiance to the powers of the wizarding world they could neither understand nor defend her from. Her father sighed. Do what you must. The world is as it is, not as it ought to be. Just be careful, Hermione. The world isn't kind to those who try to change it. For the first time, it occurred to Hermione that her parents had not always been very successful mid- to upper-class dentists. There might indeed have been a time they wanted something either more or different and been forced to take what they were allowed. It made her suddenly sad, and yet even more insistent on winning. Noodle told her she was destined for greatness. Noodle assured her that one day people would mark their calendars by when Mouse Giver arrived at Hogwarts. On a good day, he allowed that Speaker might be mentioned, and it would only be fair to allow Water Witch and Root Singer their place in history at her side. Slightly behind, and to the side, but Noodle had always told her that she was destined for greatness. Any number of people can, and should get bitten along the way. No female who didn't crawl over the bodies of at least a half-dozen rivals could really be sure she had achieved her potential. Noodle was only not a sociopath due to his being a particularly well-adjusted rock viper, rune-enhanced, and soul-bonded to 4 parcel magic student wizards. For an obligate carnivore reptile, he was gregarious, well-adjusted, and civilized. He had come a long way in teaching Mouse Giver to stand up for herself. He had come rather farther in convincing Hermione she was worth defending than Hermione had come in convincing him that murder was not always the best solution. That murder had indeed been the best solution to both Voldemort, work in progress, and Quirrel, mischief managed, did little to sway the snake that he was wrong, and even more to undermine Hermione's good English public school indoctrination that violence never solved anything. Conquered most of the world worth having with violence, so honestly the history of the British Empire didn't go a long way towards proving the doctrine of the same system, but she had worked hard to believe it anyway. Harry and Milisent hadn't helped. They worked hard to convince her that she deserved to defend herself and that her enemies didn't deserve anything. She was sure she could have held on to non-violence as a goal if it hadn't been for Neville. Neville had been sabotaged from the day he was born by his dear Uncle Algy. This had been tolerated right under everyone knows. Uncle Algy had tried to murder Neville at least a dozen times. He would mention in casual conversation, as if a defenseless child being murdered for his inheritance was just something you had to accept. That was the straw that broke Hermione's non-violent heart. Neville was worth defending, and nobody else was doing it. Magic is a weapon, and life is a war. Neville, Harry, Hermione, and Milisent were born losing that war, and maybe it was time to do something about that. Aurora Dawlish strolled into the Granger house with a sneer. "I am here for Hermione Granger. If you waste my time, I'll see you in Azkaban for some attitude adjustment and real schooling," Dawlish said, tapping his wand and letting the light fall upon his aura robes and badges, aware that he was the only being of power in at least a kilometer, a true guard among dim-witted mortals. 18 hours into the allotted 24. Either you are faster getting the rescind order to me than your late arrival implies, or you and your superiors, WLL, be called to answer to the Hogwarts board for treaty violations. Won't that be fun? Can't image the lazy prat who got the ministry bend over a barrel for Malfoy to whip concessions out of would be at all popular around the water cooler at work. Hermione shook her head sadly, like she was examining a particularly dim pupil in summer school. For threatening a minor with Azkaban, you could be brought up on charges. For bringing up Azkaban itself before Muggles, you could be brought up on a second set of charges. How about you perform Priori Incantatem on my wand? Assure yourself the Ministry has made a terrible mistake before your wand suffers an accidental discharge and dispels your career," Hermione said, looking Dawlish in the eyes with pure defiance. "Who does this little chit think she is?" "Wand, mudblood," Dawlish snapped. Hermione handed over her wand, and in a perfect imitation of Sybil Trelawney, the divination professor at Hogwarts, she intoned eerily while handing over her wand. "Oh yes, Aurora Dawlish. It is sensitivity training in your future. Yes, yes, tolerance training on blood status, gender identity, and racial purity," Hermione said, shaking her hands beside her head like Trelawney did when prophesying someone's doom. With a snarl, Dawlish cast the command and frowned. The wand hadn't cast anything in over a month. He sneered at Hermione. The little mudblood thought she was smart. She wanted to wave regulations at him. Let's play that game. He might take the arcational top up to his pay to turn a blind eye to the sort of thing reasonable people knew shouldn't really be illegal. But he was a Merlin be damned aura, and no muggle-born child was talking back to him. "Let's be seeing your work room then. Let's see what kind of forbidden things you have, little mudblood smartass," Aurora Dawlish said, and Hermione led him downstairs. On Hermione's workbench were her rune-engraving tools, save the magical goblin's silver needle that was quietly orbiting her hand since she entered her warded workroom. Anti-muggle barrier, entirely rune-based and powered off the bleed from the adjacent ley line 2 blocks over. No muggle could get down here with a search warrant and pound of C4, Hermione said, as Aura Dollish's hopes of finding enchantments in sight of muggles vanished as he passed the basement wards. No windows, so no outside observation was possible, so no way of pretending he got a muggle complaint. There was a cauldron, workbench, and those terrible muggle lights that hurt the eyes. He ran his wand around and found the remnants of the lumos. There was a lot of rune work on the bits and barbs on the workbench. Had to be 20 different things in pieces on the bench. You would have to be Arthur Bloody Weasley to parse out what all the bits made when put together. The fact that some of the bits made a Walther PPK when put together probably represented a flaw in aura training. They pretty much thought muggle guns were flintlocks unless they were veterans of the Grindelwald War. There was a Lumos here, Dawlish snapped. Well done, said Hermione. Something triggered the muggle watch, although getting a warning letter within the minute says that someone had been paid to watch my house pretty much all day and night just hoping for something. Not that I'm saying you are corrupt, just that the timing looks a lot like a put-up job, and you are the one sent to do the dirty bit. Dawlish pointed his wand at Hermione. Your wand read clean. Explain. Hermione crossed her arms. House elf told me not to go back to Hogwarts. I refused. He said he could make me. Cast Loomis, and look, here you are, trying to make me not go back to Hogwarts. How does it feel to work for a house elf? Hermione said cheerfully, knowing that anyone so obsessed with blood purity to call her a mudblood in front of her parents on an official aura call would be enough of a supremacist to be deeply insulted at the thought of serving a house elf. You expect me to believe that? Dawlish sneered. He had a good sneer. He practiced. Don't care. Muggle-born can't own house elves, so not even you can spin anything he does to be my issue. My wand is clean, I cast no spells. You asked a question, I offered the truth. What you do with it is not my problem. Hermione said with a hair flip she learned from Milisent. Actually, she was pretty much channeling her Slytherin friend for this whole confrontation. Hermione was not good at confrontation, but she had a friend who lived for them. Dawlish was done playing nice aura. There were no witnesses. She had no blood status. She was not connected. She couldn't even legally defend herself. He would have the truth out of her, then just obliterate the wreckage. If she ended up a little stupider and weaker, well served the uppity mudblood right. Pointing his wand at the witch he cast, Legerdemains. His mind smashed into the little witches like a battering ram. He didn't try to be subtle or gentle. He pierced her mind as deeply as he could. He wanted it to hurt, and he wanted her to be so terrified of him that she would never raise her gaze, let alone her voice to him again. He struck deeply with the training of an aura and used none of his skill to avoid hurting her. It proved a mistake. He was deep inside her mind. Her memories were all around him, but so were coils of black nightmare. Scales of violet-tinged blackness, some graven with shining silver runes, slid and slithered between his mind and the path back. You shouldn't have hurt her. She is mine. A voice hissed in Parseltongue, a language last spoken by the Dark Lord himself. The voice wasn't human, though. Dawlish glimpsed the face of a great serpent darker than night. Then there were only white fangs and pain. Hermione felt a jolt of pain in her head, then Dawlish was screaming. He screamed and screamed. Hermione's parents were calling from upstairs, demanding to know if everything was all right. Everything was not all right. The aura had tried something with his wand, and now he was spasming on the floor screaming. Blood was coming from his eyes and nose. He had just wet himself. The aura was crawling along the floor in no particular direction. He was pawing at the ground before the wall, writhing like he was in agony, but no longer able to even speak. Turning to her potions rack, she looked for answers. Not healing, most of the damage wasn't physical. Not bones, not blood, not poison. He eyed the calming draught she made more or less, because she had the ingredients in her garden fresh and free, and enjoyed making the potion. Calming draught. I mean, it couldn't really hurt. She wished they had a healing course at Hogwarts. It being a post-Newt study was so frustrating. Hermione finally decided to gamble and forced the potion into the aura's throat. He came back to himself slowly. When he did, his eyes locked on her. Then he scooted away along the floor away from her. You have snakes in your head. Dawlish screamed. Drama queen much, Hermione snapped. I have rudimentary occlumency skills as taught by Noodle, the most skilled mind art practitioner I know. Noodle is a sentient snake, so it is not unreasonable that there are non-human elements to my mental defenses. If you injured yourself during that utterly illegal intrusion into my mind, you will find that any legal repercussions will be yours. Even if you had a warrant, my head of house, as my magical guardian, would have to be present for any such mental probe, and it would be done only in the presence of a certified medwitch. You know, in case of someone having abominable control of their legitimacy and hurting themselves assaulting a 12-year-old. Dawlish staggered up the stairs and out. That witch wasn't right. Her defenses were something like you would expect of some scion wearing the lord or heir's ring to an ancient and noble house, not a muggle-born bitch in the suburbs. There was a living snake inside her brain, inside her soul. Dawlish felt the poison working inside him. He had to apparate back, the calming draft giving him the control to. To assault her mind again meant risking death. I don't care what who was being paid. They could send someone else next time. I expect my clearance letter by own before the time is up, Aura Dawlish. Tick-tock, Dawlish. Tick-tock. Hermione chased Aura Dawlish from her house with that warning. Any scraps of dignity or pride trailed behind him like the wedding train of a runaway bride. Was that strictly speaking necessary, Hermione? Her father asked, alarmed at the fear in the grown law enforcement official's face as he ran from their home. Yes, Daddy. Sixth rule of Slytherin. The hand that strikes you must lose fingers, or it will strike again. Hermione quoted. I thought you were Hufflepuff, asked her confused mother. Hermione walked over and gave her a hug, tears dripping from her eyes for reasons she couldn't explain. I am as Hufflepuff as they allow me, and as Slytherin as I need to be. Hermione said, and determined that along with the present for the Weasleys for the Dungbombs, Harry for the Walther PPK, goblins view all arms sales as just right and holy, especially the illegal ones. She owed Milisent Bulstrode the biggest gift of all. Knowledge is a weapon, magic is a weapon, and weapons are weapons. Only now was she seeing how thoroughly the rules wanted Hermione to be disarmed. She was done playing by them. 14. Chapter 14, Family Dinner. The notice was delivered by her dear aunt. Her father was a Bulstrode. He had been heir secondus when he married his muggle-born wife, and soiled the purity of the Bulstrode line with a half-blood, and one that looked like a muggle weight-lifter, not a proper delicate flower of an ancient and noble line. Not most ancient and noble, but if she didn't look like the front half of a centaur, she might have been worth marrying up into one of the great houses, and pull Bulstrode into the forefront. You are summoned to formal dinner tonight. We are graced with some esteemed company. Lord Selwyn has expressed a very great interest. You know he was a victim of the Imperious Curse during the Dark Lord's rise, and is most curious to hear about your experiences with the Dark Lord. Her aunt shivered when she spoke Dark Lord, and she licked her lips in a way that suggested she was both very aware Lord Selwyn had never been under the Imperious Curse to serve Voldemort, and had as few doubts about her precious Dark Lord's cause as Selwyn did. Bugger, said Milisent, unknowingly quoting Hermione in a similar situation that very night. Rising from her workbench, where a bewildering array of Zonko joke-sharp toys and thrift store enchanted objects were in various states of sabotage, she went to her desk and penned a quick letter. She had been experimenting with using her rune Isar to stop enchantments. Some collapsed when stilled, some shut off like a switch, and resumed happily when the stasis was removed, and some were somehow destabilized by even an instant of stoppage, and she would be damned if she could figure out why. Surviving the night seemed the more urgent issue, so she would focus on that now. Family dinner. Death Eaters invited. Noodles required for diplomacy, she wrote in the slanted, flowing script of Parletongue. Her Aunt Lydia shivered when she tried to read it. The mind of a non-Parseltown flinched from attempting to read it. Part of the whole Parselmouths are evil reputation came from the reaction of non-speakers to the sight or sound of the language itself. Sticking her head out the window, she gave a sharp two-tone whistle, and one of the family owls swooped in. Gringots, double quick, reply requested, she said, feeding the owl a treat fortified with a strength-enhancing potion. Hermione was on to something with the potion-treated mice. Magical predators like post owls and rock vipers could be enhanced by potions fed to their prey, in ways their bodies could never be enhanced by potions or charms applied to them directly. Hermione would probably write a paper about it. Milisent was less driven to sharing the advantage, and this owl will need its strength. Milisent, You are being asked to share your experience, not being fined for breaking Dumbledore's precious school. Besides, the sum total of your trust vault wouldn't buy Lord Selwyn's shoes." Her Aunt Lydia sneered. She had married into the Bulstrode family and had no understanding of a daughter of that house who didn't live to marry into a higher status than the half-blood daughter of the former heir. She naturally assumed Milisent had no idea how rich Lord Selwyn was. Lord Selwyn was not the highest status of the old dark families. That honor went to Lucius Malfoy, but he had been sufficiently powerful that, when he claimed to be under the imperious curse, and offered to cover half the deficit the DMLE had accrued largely losing the war with Voldemort, until he unaccountably got killed, failing to murder the boy who lived. No one really looked too hard to see if he was telling the truth. The war was over, rebuilding was expensive, and Dumbledore did love second chances. Millicent turned her head most innocently and batted her eyelashes at her aunt in a manner that would make Daphne Greengrass blink as she recognized her own techniques replicated perfectly by the usually Amazonian girl. "But Auntie, I am sending for an accessory that will highlight that gown you bought me for the ball," Millicent said, every facial muscle selling the idea that she didn't recognize the black gown, cut far too mature for her age, was little more than advertising for a quick sale of a perishable item. Ay, young girl of noble house, before her innate half-blooded foolishness reduced her market value to House Bulstrode and her lord husband. Aunt Lydia blinked, her train of thought derailed right off the platform and into the dragon paddock for a good torching and general breakage. "But you refused to go to the winter ball," Lydia said, stamping her foot in frustration. Millicent rolled her eyes. "Right, like I am going to stop spending time with Heir Potter and Heir Longbottom just to parade in front of dozens of heirs secondus and tierce, half of whom are second and third choices for houses, so minor I had to look them up. I did read the guest list. It isn't like you invited Lord Selwyn to your winter ball," Millicent said, implying that rather than ignoring political marriage, she simply would only consider do so to move rather farther up. To Aunt Lydia, this seemed perfectly reasonable. The idea of parading a half-dressed 12-year-old in front of a 70-year-old, sure, for wizards that was like a muggle early 30s, but still seemed to be what any decent family would do, and for once Millicent was going to do her part. Nodding firmly, she barked out an order. "Trudy, Imogen." Aunt Lydia commanded, and two female house elves in quite well-decorated livery appeared with a pop. "Yes, mistress," they said in stereo. "Miss Millicent will be wearing the black formal gown. See to her hair, styling, makeup, and see that she has appropriate shoes. She claims to have proper jewelry coming from Gringots, but if it is insufficient to claim Lord Selwyn's interest, you have my permission to take something from the family vaults." Aunt Lydia strode out. Trudy and Imogen were good house elves, and liked Miss Millicent, but they obeyed Lord Lancaster and Lady Lydia, his wife. Rarely did they have a chance to show Miss Millicent the care and support they felt she was owed as a daughter of the house to which they were bound. Millicent smiled at Trudy and Imogen. She gave them a big hug. "Oh, Trudy, Imogen, we are going to have such wonderful fun. Before you draw me a bath, can you open my window and put the bed directly beneath it?" The two house elves had no idea why one would do such a thing. But then again, the two house elves had probably never seen a magically steroid-enhanced owl attempt to deliver a magical rock viper by air. Millicent understood, though. Presentation was all about proper attitude and accessories. The Trudy was working on Millicent's hair. The short Quidditch hairdo that she usually sported had grown out a bit in summer, but not by that much. Millicent had an image in mind. She had been quite taken by her mother's cinema habit and had decided that she rather liked the styles of the 1920-30s. The Flappers had one hairstyle she could do and make work. It was the finger wave updo. Her raven black hair and pale skin would draw all eyes to her bare neck and shoulders, where the shining silver runes were etched permanently into her skin. Athala the footed diamond shape on the top of her left breast, for family. Algiz the trident of the elk horn for protection on her right, and the stark silver line of Issa. The rune of ice, of stasis, of death, nestled right above her heart. Looking at her night-black gown of iridescent scales that swooped down suggesting curves, where frankly if you were looking there on a 12-year-old you needed arresting, She knew the great sparkling flows of loose fabric would draw the eye every time she moved. Her aunt had bought it to draw the eyes of old perverts to a young virgin. Milisent wanted to draw the eyes of a room full of confident predators to a threat that might just be enough to scare them into staying their hand. Honestly, inside the house wards, if her uncle wanted her dead, it would happen. The confirmed Lord of House had powers that tapped upon the magics of the house, and every enchantment laid by every Lord or Lady of House in their long, somewhat terrifying history. Anyone other than the Lord, on the other hand, might well be convinced she was more powerful than she was. The Lord himself might be reminded that she wasn't just the lone half-blood mistake of his brother, but one tied by blood and magics, unknown to not only two great and ancient houses, but to whatever power overthrew the Dark Lord at his height. A massive thump sounded as something landed perfectly on the bed, and the postal owl that was not, that something skittered across the floor in an untidy and exhausted mess. "Ah, Imogen, could you apparate this little guy up to the owlery and give him a few treats? He is a bit done in," Millicent said, smiling softly. "What a witch! I am here. Why have you summoned me? It rained. The fluffy weakling that carried me was stupider than night pigeon of Root Singer." "It had best be important," hissed Noodle imperiously from the bed, where he slithered all over her sheets to get the English attempt at summer off his scales. "Miss Millicent, there is a dangerous snaky," squeaked Trudy, readying her fingers to snap and dispel the clear and present danger. "No, Trudy, there is the dangerous snaky. This is Noodle. Noodle, meet Trudy and Imogen. They are here to help with the task I called you for." Millicent said, reasoning with both non-human species as best she could without outright lying to either. "What is the mission?" Noodle said, rising imperiously to see what trouble his less foolish than most monkeys' protege was in. "I am required to look beautiful and possibly scare people," Millicent said. Noodle preened. "You chose wisely. I am clearly the most beautiful of all, and if you are worthy to be my steed, you must clearly be the most blessed, most graceful, and most beautiful of all your poorly designed species," Noodle said with no irony or shame at all. He slithered over the floor, examined her dress against his scales, and nodded slowly. "You have covered yourself in some scales to show that you recognize my true beauty, thus branding you as wise. You aren't wearing many of them, showing you are humble, and you bear your runes of power to show that you are mine, and of course that I will kill any of them if they threaten you, annoy me, or I don't like the offered tribute at dinner." It either amused or worried Millicent that Noodle's assessment of her fashion choices and the reasonings behind it were almost perfectly in line with her own thoughts. On the other hand, it proved that she hadn't Hufflepuffed up too much during the school year. She sent Trudy down to let her mother, father, Aunt Lydia, and Uncle Lancaster know that she would be making a grand entrance once she had received word that Lord Selwyn was seated. It was a minor violation of etiquette, but it was on the daring, flirtatious spectrum of maidenly excesses that pureblood lords were encouraged to permit the unmarried debutantes to distract them from the fact that their fate and other commodity prices were discussed over brandy in the same financial terms at those same gatherings. Lord Selwyn sat at the head of the table, which was a major violation of etiquette, as in the Lord's Hall the Lord sat at the head, even if the supreme mugwump himself came calling. Of course, among Death Eaters, this rule did not hold. Lord Voldemort sat at the head of every table, and those who spoke in his name did so as well. Lord Lancaster and Lady Lydia sat to his right in the places of honor. There was an empty place to his direct left, where Millicent would have the dubious honor of sitting for her interrogation. Her father Avery and mother Danica sat just down from her, then the Yaxleys on the right, the Parkinsons on the left, two Mulcibers and the Quincy heir on the right. It was a real who's who of unverified, unjailed, and unashamed Death Eaters. "Good of you to host us, Lancaster," said Lord Selwyn smoothly. He enjoyed watching Lord Lancaster swallow his indignation on being forced from his own seat. Lord Lancaster never took the Death Eater oath, as his late father died opposing the Dark Lord during the last war. His sympathies were rather dependent on the Dark Lord's chances, but if nothing else, the Death Eaters had proven that no one could protect you from them if you defied them. In a war fought with stunners and bindings versus killings and torture, No one worried about offending the side with stunners. I trust your daughter will be down shortly, Lord Selwyn smirked. He would have what he needed, then what he wanted. That was the privilege of the strong among the weak after all. The Dark Lord was returning, and people needed reminding of what that meant. Not my brother's daughter, Lord Selwyn. Mine, said Avery Bulstrode, turning slightly to let the light flash upon his aura badge. Lord Selwyn turned to match glares with the upstart who thought a single aura had any chance of stopping a half-dozen sworn Death Eaters from doing as they chose. Yes, it was past time people remembered how 100 Death Eaters were enough to paralyze Europe and bring Britain to its knees. The pop of a house elf arriving stopped the budding confrontation as she made a quiet announcement and drew all eyes to the dining room entrance. Miss Milisent Bulstrode. Imogen announced in a high, fluting house elf voice, and all conversation stopped. Milisent had a shining wing of wavy black hair in a finger wave updo secured with a great silver Slytherin serpent. Her black gown was iridescent black scales, swooping deeply in front with folds of fabric that caught the eye as they crossed her young chest. Her eyes were heavily made up in dark Gothic fashion, and her lips were black as death, and smiling with the slow, sultry awareness that every eye was on her, and that she knew things that none of them could dream of. Silver runes of power flashed and sparkled, flaring as they flashed with power as she stepped into the inner wards of the dining room, and the house wards reacted to her blood, rite, and magic. A dozen voices, including her parents, hissed in shock to see such a barbaric and forbidden display of non-human power on the flesh of a noble daughter of a dark house. Those voices stilled when the black serpent decoration wrapped around her arms and torso like some sort of muggle feather, boa made of onyx, raised its head and hissed. It was a living rock viper, a magical snake only less dangerous than the basilisk, and it too bore goblin silver runes on its flesh that flashed with magical power as it turned to regard the assembled nobles. "Dalla, which ones are your parents, water witch?" hissed Noodle imperiously. Milisent turned and pointed to Avery, and Danica Bulstrode, and hissed in parsley tongue to Noodle, watching the shock and horror cross the faces of the assembled Death Eaters as Voldemort's most singular claim to rule the purebloods. The gift of Salazar Slytherin was demonstrated by a half-blood from a family with no history of ever holding the gift. "This is my father Avery, and my mother Danica," she hissed to Noodle, stroking his coiling and deadly flesh as the Death Eaters grew as still as one did before the Dark Lord himself. "Tell them they have pleased me by birthing you. They will live," Noodle said, nodding to each slowly in turn. With a cold grin and eyes as empty as the depths of space, she translated Noodle's words. As Lord Yaxley choked in fury, he finally snarled a response, probably assisted by being on the other side of table and presumably out of range. "You half-blooded upstart child. You dare," he sputtered. Milisent looked at the chair that Lord Selwyn had pulled back for her prior to her entrance and slid gently into it. Noodle curved around the seat back and loomed above her like the sword of Damocles, if the sword threatened everyone at the feast except Damocles. "Mine, I think," Milisent said, sliding into the chair and pulling it into the table. She smiled at Lord Lancaster. "An honor as always to sit at your table, my lord uncle," Milisent said, making it clear who she believed rightly ruled in this place. She was supposed to be prey here, and they had come to make sport of prey. They must be taught otherwise, or the very real power differential between them, magical, monetary, and legal, would snuff her out in a heartbeat. Authority is an illusion, a shadow cast by fear upon the soil of weakness that allows it a foothold. This was one of the sayings of Salazar Slytherin, but oddly, not one the house masters had ever put up on the common room wall. It wouldn't do to have those not born to power questioning its foundations after all. Turning to Lord Yaxley, she smiled and hissed. "Dollar power dares, weakness excuses, cowardice marks." Milisent hissed, and Noodle nodded sagely, responding simply with correct. Milisent translated. "Power dares, weakness excuses, cowardice marks." It sounds better in the original parcel tongue, but even in English it's true. Milisent offered to Yaxley, quite enjoying having disrupted whatever script the Death Eater cabal had in mind for her. Whatever it was, she didn't imagine she would enjoy the ending. You think to quote the Dark Lord's words to us, we who knew him and sat by his right hand, snarled Lord Parkinson. Milisent cut off a bit of steak, a bit rare for her tastes, but perfect for some. She held it up on her fork, and Noodle stripped it off with a strike that shut Lord Parkinson up rather neatly. She took a mushroom, a bit of mashed potato, and a better done bit of steak, and chewed thoughtfully before answering. Are we all done pretending Sirius Black somehow put you all under the Imperius to be Death Eaters, some of you when he was younger than me according to the timeline? Besides, they are Salazar Slytherin's words. He left them in Parlitongue written in the Great Hall for any of his successors to read. Not my fault Voldemort lied about writing them. Anyone with the gift could read them. Milisent said, a less than subtle reminder that Harry Potter was also known to have the gift. She took a bit of the red wine. She was never allowed wine. If she got murdered tonight, at least her last drink would be really good wine. Ah yes, the Dark Lord's own words. Lord Selwyn said, drawing the conversation back to his aims, his needs, and most importantly, his control. Rumor has it, and we do hear rumors from every department in the ministry, and of course from the faculty of Hogwarts, that you personally heard the Dark Lord's words. Lord Selwyn said softly, those of us who suffered so terribly under the Imperius curse are of course most interested in what the Dark Lord said about his return and his plans. Lord Selwyn said, mouthing the lie that set most of the table to quiet laughter, but made her father's lips draw into a tight white line, his hands gripping his table knife like he yearned for his wand. He was not Lord here, nor a match for half a dozen Death Eaters with his wife and daughter in the crossfire. Milisent laughed. It was funny hearing him speak. He spoke to us in Parseltongue, then lied to Quirrel about the translation. He uses his people worse than house elves, because house elves are actually hard to replace and expensive. Idiot purebloods willing to die for him are so much cheaper. Milisent said coldly, letting her contempt for the Death Eater's flower fully in the open, stupefy, said Lord Selwyn, the light touch of his hand on Noodle's body enough to conduct the spell wandlessly. Enough, girl, you will give us all your secrets, and when you leave here, you will indeed discover how many things you can be made to do under the Imperius curse. We will have a use for all your little friends in bringing the Dark Lord back to his rightful place. Hissed Lord Selwyn. His wand flashed out, and the will of one of the inner circle Death Eaters slammed into Milisent Bulstrode. He slammed into her mind and vanished in a sea of night-black coils. Everywhere he turned he found only impenetrable black scales and hissing laughter. The girls and the snakes. His body remained frozen as his mind was lost inside the prison formed of snakes and hunger. Milisent, on the other hand, fished her wand from the upside-down holster in her dress back and pressed it experimentally into the dark mark on Lord Selwyn's wrist. Hissing in Parcel magic, she put all of her power into the name of the rune, the essence of Isa, of stasis, of ice, and of death. She had no idea what kind of magic was bound in the dark mark. If she had a dozen years, she would never be able to master it, maybe Hermione in the same time, but not her. She didn't have to understand how the power flowed, or what it did to understand her own rune, though. To understand stillness, the silence at the end of every song, the emptiness after the last heartbeat. Before the primordial explosion that created being, there was and ever had been only silence and stillness. Even now, behind the veil of motion, light, and material, the essence of the universe remembered non-being, remembered stillness, silence, and emptiness. Isa, she hissed, letting the primal power of the void flow into Lord Selwyn's dark mark through her wand. Her runes blazed with power. The white slash of her ice rune in her mid-chest blazed like cold fire, and Lord Selwyn screamed, and dissolved into black smoke and cold ash. The Death Eaters in the room grew still. Only one person had ever killed like that. When the Dark Lord removed his favor, that is how you died. He used it as punishment to his Death Eaters when they assembled together to impress upon them that those who bore his mark were his forever. That stupefy spell hurt me, Water Witch. I am well pleased that you killed him for it. Noodle hissed, angry, but quite unstunned by the late Lord Selwyn's spell. Honestly, I didn't know what it would do. I still don't know what it did. I would have to do it again a few times to really if this is the result of the dark mark stopping reporting to Voldemort or just some sort of failsafe against taking it off. Milisent said, nerves making her babble. Water Witch, stop playing mouse giver, and remind the prey they should be running. Some of them might remember they too can fight. Noodle reminded her, slithering onto the table to bring Lord Yaxley into range of fang and consequence. Does anyone else think to raise hand or wand against a daughter of Bulstrode House beneath its own wards and before its own lord? Milisent said haughtily. When in doubt, appeal to tradition and pride. It was a spinal reflex, bypassing the brain altogether with the purebloods. Lord Lancaster rose and made a ceremony about blotting his lips with a napkin before drawing himself up fully, hand well away from his wand, and staring down his not inconsiderable nose at his guests. I find the actions of Lord Selwyn have violated the hospitality of my hall and offered insult to a daughter of my house. I rescind my invitation. You may leave now, Lord Lancaster said, noting that Avery, Danica, and even Lydia had rose, wands in hand to face down the table. Leave now, Milisent hissed, letting her power lend those words a touch of legitimacy mental command. The push was not powerful enough to overcome the will of an adult wizard, but to Death Eaters, the compulsion woven into a command in Parseltongue brought back memories of the Dark Lord's commands, even as the drifting black ash of the dead Lord Selwyn reminded them of his punishments. Pursued by the ghosts of power no one in that hall commanded, they fled. Milisent collapsed to the table, and Noodle wrapped himself around her. Bloody hell, I thought I was going to pee myself. Instead, I don't think I will be able to pee for a week. I don't think I have ever been that scared, even facing Voldemort, Milisent said, face pressed into the table. Noodle rubbed his face against her gently. That was your first kill. It is always terrifying. Eat some of the prey beast in sauce. You should always feast after your first kill, Noodle urged her. Milisent started laughing. Her life coach and psychological counselor was a magical rock viper. She really was in trouble. Rubbing Nude with her cheek, she cut them both a bit of steak, her own with a speared mushroom and bit of mashed potatoes for texture. Lord Lancaster sat down, took a big breath and small sip of wine. I think, on balance, it is time we rethought our position on the return of he who must not be named, Lord Lancaster said, and Lady Lydia shot a worried glance at him. With a gesture to Imogen. Imogen, be a dear and box up Lord Selwyn. Find an urn or something. Nothing too expensive. Something basic. He did die an enemy of this house, said Lord Lancaster, moving his own chair back to the head of the table. So, said Lord Lancaster to his niece, finally looking at her as a potent and contributing member of the house, not a pretty adornment to be auctioned off for short-term political gain. Tell me about your friends, Lord Lancaster said softly, pointedly looking at Noodle, and the runes burned and woven into her flesh. Milisent looked up and asked softly, Not about Voldemort. Lord Lancaster made a sweeping gesture, oddly similar to what Imogen had made to stuff dead Death Eater into an urn. No, no. I remember his lot well enough from before. Tell me about my options. Milisent realized how pureblood customs were really more grounded in practicality than Hermione, Harry, or even Neville would credit. The time it took to gently cut and chew a piece of medium steak, with a rarer bit for her snake, allowed her time to properly form and frame her thoughts. Only a Gryffindor would face Voldemort alone. Probably die doing it too, most likely while failing. Her Hufflepuff friends knew enough to face him with their friends beside them. She, however, was Slytherin. Power coiled in the shadows, formed in the needs, desires, and fears of those who would not act on their own, who must be driven to act by one with the wit and the will to convince them that their only safety, salvation, or satisfaction came from striking when and where you directed them. Wars are started by true believers, but they are mostly won by people tricked into offering their own blood and treasure to do someone else's will. Time to get Slytherin about this and start those shadows dancing to her tune. 15. Chapter 15. Gringots and Greenhouses. Mumblethumb popped in with a rather deeper tone than other house elves. Likewise, his livery was very much the spitting image of a Roman senator's toga praetexta. He should have looked ridiculous, but Mumblethumb was the head house elf of House Longbottom, bearing the deep scars left him by his near death at the hands of the Lestrange. His loyalty to House Longbottom made it impossible for Neville to mark him. Even though hearing a house elf that magically gave himself the voice of the Muggle movie Darth Vader did tempt him to laugh, his words did not. Master Algernon has returned from his work in the unspeakables at the ministry and intends to call upon Lady Augusta about house matters before the Wizigamot. Mumblethumb explained. Neville was in one of the restricted greenhouses, doing some cuttings for new plantings for enhanced house security. Neville's command of plants was no longer something he took for granted. It was time that it was incorporated into the defense of his hall and his family. Neville sighed. It was time. He was not a frightened little squib Neville Longbottom, the boy who could never be his father Frank. Never be what Gran wanted and needed so she could let his tormented parents go. Mumblethumb, Uncle Algy, is not to be permitted into the main house any more. If he takes one step into the main house, you will apparate him here. Neville ordered quietly, working hard with his knife to make the delicate cutting and using his magic to seal both plants' wounds. No parasites or diseases would find wounds on a Longbottom cutting. Master Algernon was quite emphatic about his need to speak to Mistress Longbottom. Mumblethumb said, looking troubled. Neville looked at Mumblethumb and pulled off his gloves. He held up his right hand. "What is this on my hand?" Neville asked softly. "The heir ring of House Longbottom," Mumblethumb said proudly. "If the heir gives a command by his name and will, who has the right to counter it?" Neville asked softly. "Only the Lord," whispered Mumblethumb. "If that boot-licking, child-murdering, line-stealing, faithless, honorless, and cowardly usurper sets one foot in the mansion after I have ordered him here, I will give you clothes and burn the manor to the ground. Now, bring him here." Neville said, still softly, but with a hint of iron in his gentle tones. He should have looked ridiculous, on his knees, covered in dirt, and a plant cutting waving hello from his hand. A young boy, not even in his second year at Hogwarts, threatening a grown wizard, and not just any wizard, but an unspeakable of the Ministry of Magic. "At once, Lord Longbottom," Mumblethumb said, snapping to attention and giving a Roman salute that Neville hoped he would never give in public. His taking Roman traditions was an oddity of his elf line, but that particular salute triggered a whole lot of Gran's age range who survived the Grindelwald War. Mumblethumb popped into existence with a crack that absolutely had to be amplified simply for drama. He tossed unspeakable Algernon Longbottom face down before Neville as he carefully packed the soil down around his repotted plant. Uncle Algy's face was transforming from the usual smiling mask to the rage that Neville had always been terrified lurked was behind it. "You jumped up, little squib. It is about time I stop fooling around," Algernon roared, his wand snapping into his hand with a wordless summons. Neville simply smiled as thorn-filled whips wrapped around all four limbs and pulled so tight he could feel his joints failing. As he opened his mouth to verbalize a wandless attack, he saw Neville make a pinching motion, and two spear-like branches from nearby rows in the greenhouse lanced into his cheeks, piercing them from left to right and right to left. Thorns grew to pierce his tongue in place, even as he felt other thorns wrap around his throat. Neville looked as his Uncle Algernon, and tears were in his eyes. "On some level, I always knew. Gran needed me to be strong like my father so she could stop being afraid, and that wasn't me. That was never going to be me. You knew that, she knew that, and even I knew that." Neville said and gestured as if pulling something up from the ground. A spear of wood grew from the ground, a root that poised between the spread legs of Algernon Longbottom and promised execution by impalement. Neville looked at his Uncle Algy, and tears were rolling down his face. "That wasn't enough, though, was it? It wasn't enough I could never be the hero Gran needed, because I would still be Lord Longbottom once my parents finally died. You decided that since my father, who was rightful lord and always better than you, was gone, why not steal the title? You tried to kill me. You tried to kill me at least a dozen times I can remember, and everyone let you do it, because you pretended you were just trying to help me manifest my magic. Magic you stole from me, like you wanted to steal my title and land, when you gave me that suppressor toad as a pet, told me to handle it every day for bonding. I should have been a complete squib by the time you dropped me out the 5th-floor window on my head. I bet you were so angry when I didn't die." Neville said, standing up and facing his uncle, and would-be murderer. "On some level, I knew, but didn't want to accept. Mom and Dad are tied to a bed writhing in agony, unable to even recognize when I am there, and they are going to stay that way until they finally die. Gran is terrified to care, because then I will be taken away just like my mom and dad, and every friend she lost in the last 2 wars. You were all the family I had. If I stopped pretending not to notice you hated me, then I was alone. A weak, scared little boy with no family, no magic, and no future. Well, I got strong, Uncle Algy. And I'm not alone anymore. I am going to leave you here, Uncle Algy, and then I am going to kill 2 people that I love more than anything. When I am done, I will either come here and take out all my feelings on you, or I will run to my friends and try to be a worthier son to parents who deserved better. Algernon was screaming, but the night thorn plants that were impaling and binding him were a highly restricted plant for a reason. They were very magic resistant, and they secreted a poison that inhibited the active use of magic in those they had captured. These plants were grown by House Longbottom under license by the Ministry to defend key facilities, and certain most ancient and noble houses whose treaty rights predated the Ministry restrictions of their use. Neville turned and faced Mumblethumb. I need 2 house elves in here to keep Uncle Algy from being freed. Mumblethumb snapped his fingers, and 2 young and surprised-looking house elves looked from the bleeding and whimpering Algernon to Neville and Mumblethumb. The head house elf sniffed and gestured in the finest rhetorical tradition with his toga-laden left arm. It is the heir's command that the line usurper remain bound in this place until his further orders. Until he or I tell you otherwise, the line thief remains bound, Mumblethumb said, as if pronouncing the sack of Carthage or the ascension of Caesar. 2 confused house elves looked from Neville to the twitching and screaming older Longbottom uncle and blinked several times in confusion before nodding. Neville stepped to Mumblethumb. Take me to St. Mungo's, then fetch Gran. It is time. Neville hated St. Mungo's with all the hatred he never dared aim at Uncle Algy or even his Gran. He knew he could never be a hero like Dad and Mom. Never be Frank Longbottom, prefect, head boy, or a war hero. Tortured beyond salvation by a full squad of Voldemort's personal Death Eaters, and never broke. Alice Longbottom had married in, just as his Gran Augusta Longbottom, but they had the same fierceness, because Alice Longbottom never broke either. He walked between them, their bodies locked in a rictus of pain, a spasm that was only kept from shattering bones and tearing muscles by the constant stream of potions pouring into them. Trapped in a forgotten battle from a war the Ministry was trying hard to ignore was still going on. Forgotten soldiers in a war we quit fighting. Neville heard the crack as Mumblethumb apparated in with Augusta Longbottom. Neville, what is the meaning of this? Where is Algernon? Augusta began. She trailed off as Neville undid his shirt, pulling it off. His runes shone bare and barbaric in the light. When had Neville stopped being the round and soft boy? Who was this rugged boy, and where did he get all those scars? Mom, Dad, I'm sorry I'm never going to be the son you wanted. I am never going to be an aura like you. I love herbology and plants and living things. I love the old magic, the wild magic, the life magic. I may even become a healer. Neville's voice grew hard and shaky. But I'm not weak anymore, Mum. I am not a coward anymore, Dad. I know why Gran couldn't let you go. She was so terrified of being alone, of only having me left, and me never going to be enough. It's not your fault. You fought Dumbledore's stupid war. You used stunners when your enemies killed. You sent them to prison, while they tortured you, until the only memory I have of my own mom and dad is being terrified to be dragged in to see you again. Neville looked up at Augusta Longbottom, and his eyes were filled with such rage she was actually scared of her grandson. Well, I'm not that weak little boy anymore. I won't be Dumbledore's little hero. I'm too much of a coward to ever let my enemies live. I have friends now. They taught me there are things in this life worth defending, and taught me that I am enough to stand beside them. It's not your war anymore, Mom. You can stop now, Dad. It's my turn. It's my war, and you can rest. Looking Augusta Longbottom in the eye, he placed one hand on each resting figure. He took a deep breath and drew in. All the light in the room faded until only the 2 figures on the bed shone in bright silver, 2 lying figures and the crossed crescent rune of Jira, the rune of harvest, the rune of reaping. Rest now, your watch is done, and mine begun. Jira, Neville said quietly, and the 2 figures went slack. The tension of the unending spasm of Crucio fled as the 2 tormented spirits were at last free. Neville turned to face his Gran. Uncle Algy has been trying to kill me my whole life. I loved my parents very much, and I just killed them. If I ever see Uncle Algy, he will die screaming. Neville's voice was cold, almost inhuman. Augusta Longbottom saw a weariness in it she remembered from her husband, back from the war, or from Frank, back from one more atrocity they couldn't stop. How had her grandson gotten so traumatized on her watch? "Master!" shouted Mumblethumb, causing Neville to turn. There was a ring rising from Lord Frank Longbottom's hand. It flew through the air and towards his hand. The air ring fell from his finger as the Lord's ring slid into its place. There were alarms ringing, and people charging in with wands raised. The feel of death magic in St. Mungo's triggered so many alarms that the duty auras were already charging down the hall. Augusta shook herself, smiled at Neville, and gripped his shoulder as she walked to block the door to the ward. This is House Longbottom business. Lord Longbottom has passed. Long live the Lord. Augusta said, slamming her best Protego Maxima to block the doorway. Mumblethumb turned and knelt before Neville in a voice that remained a perfect copy of Darth Vader from the Muggle movie Hermione showed them. Mumblethumb asked in all seriousness, "What is thy bidding, my master?" Neville really wanted to know if Hermione was corrupting his house elves with Roman period drama and Star Wars, but with auras banging on his grand's defensive shields with questions about death magic in hospitals on their minds, it was probably a later conversation. To Gringots Mumblethumb, "I think I need to stay over with Harry." Meanwhile in Muggleland, Hermione Granger must not go back to Hogwarts. Darby shrieked. Hermione increased her jog. No matter how magical, his stubby little legs were little better than a gnome's, and honestly whatever dark family he worked for didn't feed him. He can't have that much stamina. "Sod off, Legolas," Hermione shouted as she ran from the renegade elf. "It's Darby Mistress, and please stop. Darby must save you," Darby said, popping ahead of her and transfiguring a garden hedge into a lion to chase her. Hermione reached behind her and grabbed a squirt bottle, squeezing the contents onto the roaring lion, then jumping aside as it attempted to swipe her with its leonine yet vegetative claws. Taking out a Zippo lighter, she flicked it at the head she just soaked, and it went up in flames. Darby looked shocked. "Mistress has used magic. Mistress can't go to Hogwarts." Darby danced his happy dance until Hermione kicked him where elves would keep their junk if elves had junk. "Kiss my Kebler, elf." "I am going to Hogwarts," Hermione shouted. She continued to kick the whimpering elf until it apparated away. She stayed on scene as sure enough, a ministry owl darted down. She already had her treats ready, gave one to the bird, tucking it neatly under her arm, and writing on the DMLE disciplinary note for detected underage magic with her wand. Per Ministerial Regulations, Decree 13, on the reasonable restriction on underage magic, Paragraph 4, Subsection C. I hereby demand and aura verify that the wand of the accused Hermione Granger has not cast any magic since departure from Hogwarts, and have written confirmation of the removal of the automatic violation notice. A magically animated bush is currently burning to death in potential sight of Muggles. I am unable to use my wand to put out the fire, conceal the magically animated bush, nor obliterate the Muggles, so your prompt action would be appreciated. Hermione waited as the fire department showed up first. She had been using her fire magic quietly to make sure nothing else caught fire, and led the animated burning bush into the middle of the motorway so that no buildings or pedestrians were in danger of burning. Honestly, if a Muggle was dim enough to drive his private car into a burning lion racing about the motorway, that was between him and his insurance. Hermione had done her best. The fire department put out the fire, but then had to break out their axes when the not quite extinguished bush attempted to attack them. When the auras arrived, she pointed to the firemen battling a three-quarters consumed bush with axes and water hoses. "Well, do something. There are Muggles in the crowd with cameras. This is something you people are supposed to do something about. By law I can't," Hermione stressed again. Two auras held her at wand point, while another cast a powerful finite at the poor mostly burned attack bush. "Hand over your wand, criminal," the old female aura commanded. "Please, citizen, may I inspect your wand for prior incantations and evidence of suspected use of underage magic, in light of a clearly magical occurrence in your immediate vicinity?" Hermione cooed. "Is that more what you wanted to say? If you want a criminal's wand, go ask Dawlish. How that corrupt little thug avoided Azkaban, I don't know." Hermione said. Listen, Granger, this is the 10th time we have been called out to deal with your underage magic. Give me the damned wand. The female aura snarled. Hermione crossed her arms and refused. I will not be surrendering my wand at all, ever. You may perform the Priory Incantum charm in front of me to assure the Ministry and myself that I have in fact not performed any magic in front of Muggles. Fine, the female aura snarled. Let me inspect it. Hermione extended her wand. Name and badge number for my harassment suit against the Ministry. This is 10 times in 1 month, you know. Aura Bemish. 1328. The aura muttered as she cast the Priory Incantum and noted that the wand had not produced any magic in the last 2 months. Troll dung, called the aura who had just oblivated 4 firemen and fried a perfectly innocent video camera. You were observed lighting this bush on fire. He shouted, which was not terribly discreet for a clean-up crew, but government workers and all that. Transfigured, an animated bush that the house elf Darby made in public to attack me in yet another attempt to get the Ministry of Morons to do his dirty work and prevent me returning to Hogwarts. I did light it on fire. I did not use magic, Hermione said, her automatic deference to authority not having survived a summer of persecution. Aura Bemish smirked. If not magic, what did you use to light the bush? Caustic wit. Hermione walked over to the discarded water bottle. Jellied gasoline thickened with aluminum salts. Muggles call it napalm and developed it to burn each other to death in war, but they also use it on buildings and vehicles. Walking a bit farther over, she recovered her Zippo lighter with a badger on the side, flicked it open to show the flame, then flicked it closed. Zippo lighter, refillable, stylish, and less than 15 quid at the local cigar store, Hermione said happily. For the 10th time this summer, the Aura team sent to deal with one Hermione Granger went away unhappy, but unable to prove any magic except house elf used in her vicinity. Hermione decided she needed to go for a run to burn off some stress. She was being hunted by a house elf who didn't seem to have any idea how dangerous his stunts were. Several could have killed people, sometimes her, sometimes others, and Hermione's ability to stop them without magic was being pushed to the limit. She wasn't Batman. She didn't have a utility belt. She had a fanny pack. Purebloods didn't have this problem. They sat behind their wards and played with their wands until they all got carpal tunnel or went blind. It wasn't fair. She was 2 kilometers into her run when a BMW raced past her, cut across and blocked her. A second pulled in behind and blocked the road behind her. Tina swung out with a rough-looking grown-up. 2 more got out of the BMW in front. Bad luck, Granger. You could have had a lot of fun with my last group of friends. They really know how to show a dirty little commoner like you a good time. These lads, though, they are just going to break your arms and legs and cut up your face a little bit so you understand your place, Tina said happily. Hermione realized that something had fundamentally shifted inside her. The wizarding world was full of wonders and magic, but largely it was constantly filled with kill-or-be-killed dangers on all sides. A mental health professional was a long black rune-marked talking magical murder serpent, whose wisdom and tools for emotionally processing trauma were both useful and probably corrupting. This thought process occurred to her as she calmly drew her Walther PPK from her back holster and began shooting. Wands are like pistols. They naturally point to where your eye is locked. Without bothering with sights, she fired 3 quick, 380 rounds into Tina's leg, shattering her left knee. Turning to the second boy who was closing, she just double-tapped the right side of his chest and shoulder and watched as he staggered in confusion. Between the notice me not charms and the silencing charms, the poor muggles could neither see nor hear the pistol, but the inexplicable bullet impacts were terribly noticeable. Hermione turned to face the second set of men and pointed backwards at the shot girl and thug and screamed loudly. "Oh my God, somebody shot them," Hermione yelled. The 2 thugs froze. They came for a beatdown. They were right proper roadmen, thugs and gangsters, but they didn't come strapped. They came with fists and brass knuckles, and now someone shot 2 of the other crew. Sod this. That bitch Tina didn't tell us the little slag was connected with another crew. The lead of the second pair of thugs shouted, as he decided, since Hermione clearly had no gun, that she had some sort of other criminal gang snipers. Somehow randomly in place at the block, they chose to jump her. They got back into their BMW and tore off. Hermione walked back to Tina and knelt down beside her. God, that looks painful. Too bad phones don't work around me, or I could totally call you an ambulance. It is a damned shame that just for the minor offense of trying to cripple and maim me for life, some hoodlum shot out your kneecap. There is no justice in this city, no safety at all. Why, you never even saw who shot you. It could be anyone, anywhere. It really must suck to be you. You must be terrified to even leave the house, Hermione said, then patted Tina softly on the cheek. Tina didn't quite understand what Hermione was saying when she sauntered out of sight. She could have sworn it was something like, going to have to make a chocolate-flavored mouse for Noodle. Hermione raised her wand and infused it with enough power to trigger the night bus summons, but not enough to cause a full Loomis and set off yet another Auror investigation. The night bus held up, and Stanley the driver smiled down at her. Where to, miss? Gringotts Bank, please, and don't stop for Aurors, Hermione said, and Stan laughed, under the false assumption she was joking. In a somewhat less muggle neighborhood, in a somewhat better defended home, a family council was being held. There are Aurors out front, Dad said, and Milisent turned and pointed to him. There are Aurors in here, Milisent pointed out. They can stay out there. A guest raised hand and wand to a daughter of the House of Bulstrode. All Milisent did was kill him. It was honestly a measured response for his rudeness. Aunt Lydia sniffed, and Milisent was suffering whiplash from the change in her aunt's attitude. Still, if we let them in with Millie here, there could be impulsive overreactions. Her mom said, leaving the subtext unspoken. Lord Lancaster Bulstrode sighed, especially if they have been paid in advance for a regrettable incident. Sorry, Avery, I know not all your co-workers are for sale. Her dad winced. He was an honest Auror, in a force that was as often a tool for political thuggery as law enforcement since the post-war rapprochement era began. He nodded his understanding. Lord Lancaster put his hand on Milisent's shoulder. How about you pop round to that friend of yours at Gringotts? You know the Aurors can't go after you there. I will see what I can do about calming them down before you have to go to school again. Her dad smiled and winked at her. While you are there, apply for House Selwyn. He challenged you to combat and died to your wand. By ancient right of conquest, the house and its assets are yours. If you are Lady Selwyn, we can't arrest you. Axe Lord One Thumb took Harry to his duty post. He was doing a work guard shift in the front hall of Gringotts. One Thumb was still complaining that all his time among witches and wizards was going to make him soft and weak. I don't like all the time you spend among those friends of yours. Pure bloods and their fancy manners, and trading veiled threats over canapes. Not an honest warrior in the lot. Don't get me started on the Muggle-born. Probably thinks you can hug it out with the Death Eaters. You're going to get soft, boy, Axe Lord One Thumb said as he watched Harry take his post and snap to attention. This moment of honest goblin cave-elching was ruined by a halberd-wielding goblin running in with a rock viper slithering fast afterward. Axe Lord, I have a wizard and 2 witches claiming right of sanctuary with Clan Hematite. What do I do? The goblin called, looking nervous. Why is this worth you running from your post? Demanded Axe Lord One Thumb coldly. Well, it is because of the few dozen Aurors who are out front, arguing about who gets to arrest who for what. Mouse Giver says I am not allowed to bite them. They have been harassing her. They are harassing Water Witch, and they even harass Root Singer, but he at least didn't tell me I couldn't bite them. He said I shouldn't bite them, but if I must, I must. Noodle hissed happily, climbing up his speaker, ready to pass dealing with angry monkeys to his designated speaking monkey. I am pleased with Root Singer's growing reasonableness, Noodle said smugly, and Harry's eyes got wide. Axe Lord, I need to deal with this. You know the soft one you kept saying was too weak to object to someone cutting his throat. He is now the one advising it might be okay to start killing Aurors on the steps to Gringotts, Harry said, and with a grunt, One Thumb gestured him forward. Harry gestured them in, and Axe Lord One Thumb walked through them to the steps to sneer at the Aurors. Gringotts is part of the Goblin Nation. By treaty, if you enter and use magic at all, we will feed you to our dragons and return you to your families by the shovel full, One Thumb said, fingering the edge on his axe and looking down on the Aurors on his front steps. Harry turned to face a nervous Hermione. Is that going to be a problem for you, Harry? One Thumb answered for him as he came back in and gripped her shoulder with his free hand. I would pay good gold for the chance to do that again. Never can have enough chances to send those worthless wand wavers off with their broom between their legs. Where are all the good ones gone? There would be blood on the walls if I told Mad Eye to sod off, but these ones just take it and run. I fear for the next generation. One Thumb said, then gave a squint to the three bedraggled-looking and oddly dressed witches and wizards. A witch in a black ball gown, a boy in gardening wear with an open shirt, and a witch dressed in muggle jogging gear. There was a story here, or he was a garden gnome. Right so, what is you running for Gringots with auras on your tails? Neville sighed. I killed 2 people at St. Mungo's. Well, maybe 3. I never did tell them to let Uncle Algy go, so he might be plant food by now. He sounded sad, but One Thumb had to admit that was a sort of goblin-y reason to show up looking for sanctuary. Milisent squeezed Neville's shoulder, and Hermione gave him a long hug. There it is, thought One Thumb. They are hugging again. Witches are going to turn the boy weak. Milisent blushed and spread her arms as if to imply it was nowhere near as serious as it sounds. But then she spoke, and it kind of was. Lord Selwyn attacked me with magic at dinner in front of my family and a half-dozen Death Eaters, and I kind of killed him a little bit. Milisent said. Hermione, always one for clarity, asked the question no one else was tactless enough to. I killed him a little bit. What state did you leave him in? Hermione asked, purely for clarity. Milisent shrugged. Burned him down to a fine sifting of black ash. House elves stuck him in a second-hand urn, stuck a cork in the top, and Owl posted him home. This time Neville gripped her shoulder, and looking her in the eye, he said softly, He tried to hurt you, he dies. If you do it, or I do it, Noodle, Harry, or Hermione, he was dead when he tried to hurt you. Neville said, and Milisent stated, crying quietly. One Thumb was trying to process this. Finally, he turned to Hermione and asked, What are you in for, hugging without a license? He sneered, sure at least the little squirrel girl lived down to the weak witch stereotype. I am the most peaceful and reasonable of witches. I may have lit a lion on fire or a bush, depending on how you look at it. Kicked the tar out of a house elf. Oh, and I shot a couple of muggles, but there is very good reason to think they lived. May not walk again, but that is so not my issue. Hermione said, lifting the back of her sweatshirt to show the back holster of the rune-engraved Walther PPK. Axe Lord One Thumb burst out laughing. He laughed long and hard, eventually having to use Hermione's shoulder to hold himself up. Harry Potter, you are relieved. Go settle these warriors in your clan cave. I will summon another guard for your post. They made it halfway to the living quarters below Gringotts when a goblin-shaped missile hit them. It was Harry's sister, Glitterbright. Sleepover, Glitterbright said, grabbing Hermione and Milisent each by an arm and dragging them towards the cave. Mom, Harry brought girls home. We are having a sleepover, she called in gobbledygook, which by this point both Hermione and Milisent could understand and speak somewhat. Harry and Neville shared a weak smile. Mental, they're all mental, Harry said, and the 2 boys shared a smile that said that things were going to be all right. Maybe not now, but soon. It was a start. The bad summer was over. There was time to get a little good summer in before school started. In Malfoy Manor, Lucius looked upon the book in his gloved hands. His master had given it to him with orders to guard it safely. He knew how dangerous this book was and what it could unleash. The Dark Lord's plans had been shattered by that Potter brat and his friends. The attempts at damage control had shattered again by that Bulstrode chit and Potter's blasted snake. No, the Dark Lord's return could not be guaranteed as long as Dumbledore sat in his pretty castle, training dangerous little pawns like Potter, Longbottom, Bulstrode, and Granger to become more dangerous pieces upon the board of the great game. Dumbledore needed to be ousted from that castle, and those dangerous little pieces needed removing from the board before they got promoted into actual threats. Malfoy eyed the book and smiled. Castles can be taken, and how better than from within? Perhaps it is time that Lucius Malfoy shows why it is the subtle players, not the magical brutes, that will assure the return and victory of the Dark Lord. It was time the Chamber of Secrets reopened. The only question is who to sacrifice. Malfoy smiled. These were the most delicious choices. He had weeks before school started. He may as well savor every moment before he struck.